Useless ancient instincts we all still have. As much as we like to believe that as a species we are civilized and technologically advanced, in reality, a lot of modern day society and our day-to-day life is still heavily influenced and, quite honestly, controlled by primal instincts, deeply ingrained in our brains over hundreds of thousands of years of human development. But in this video, we're going to discuss examples of primal instincts that were helpful at the time that today are quite useless or, in some cases, making our lives harder. Let's get started. I would guarantee that most people watching this video, if not everybody watching this video, enjoys a sweet treat. And while some of us enjoy a sweet treat guilt-free, some of us also feel bad that we quite often crave such sugary things that we know aren't good for us. But the reason most of us crave such sugary and sweet foods and drinks was at one point in time crucial for our survival. During the ancient prehistoric days of humanity, food was a luxury and likely the most valuable currency. And it's for that reason that humans were really eating anything and everything they could get their hands on. But not all foods are built the same. Eating bugs and leaves is cool, but nothing quite hits the spot to a caveman like something extremely sweet or something extremely fatty. And the reason for this is simple. Sugar specifically is extremely valuable to the body because it gives your body a quick boost of energy, something that many foods aren't able to provide. And because of this, your body responded extremely positive to this food source that was able to give you such a quick hit of energy. Even if your body wasn't in dire need of energy at the time, your body is able to store that excess energy in the form of fat, meaning that at any time, at any place, if there was anything sweet around, your body knew to consume it there and then. And at the time, this could have meant life or death. Now, unfortunately, the stakes today are not nearly as high. And I would say that most people, if not everybody watching this video, does not struggle with food scarcity either at all or definitely not to the extent that cavemen did. Meaning that eating the bag of gummy bears on your nightstand isn't life or death. It's really just how much willpower do you have to overcome your primal urges. In today's world, eating anything sweet you can get your hands on almost has the opposite effect, because at best, this excess sugar is just going to put extra weight on your body. And at worst, it's actually going to have a detrimental effect on your overall health. The complete opposite of the intent of this instinct in primal times. So if you ever feel bad about having low discipline when it comes to sweets, it's because a caveman hundreds of thousands of years ago realized that berries and honey give you a kick of energy that bugs, leaves, and animal fats just couldn't do. Oh, and as a quick bonus, the reason why everything in the world today is so sugary is directly related to the human instinct of craving excess sugar. Humans don't crave sugar because everything in the modern diet is full of sugar, because these companies realized long ago that humans fundamentally crave sugar. And if these food companies could provide it to you, you are very unlikely to say no. And that's another trend you'll notice in this video. Not only are your instincts personally working against yourself, but other entities are using your instincts against you for profit, which is kind of dystopian. Another more dystopian part of modern day life is the fact that even though we are living in the best time ever to exist as a human, we likely deal with the most issues ever. And this is because humans have a deeply ingrained negative bias, which, like you guessed, in primal times served a crucial purpose in our survival. But in the modern day, in a world full of complexity, it only makes our life that was supposed to be easier much harder. I would argue that most people understand that they should be grateful for everything they have in their life. But realistically, gratitude is something you kind of have to remind yourself to have and do. And this is because your mind isn't naturally programmed to be like, oh, this is so great, this is awesome. No, your mind is actually programmed for the opposite. The ancient primal world was filled with real immediate dangers, natural disasters, predators, other tribes, famine, and so forth. You and your loved ones' lives were consistently under attack. And because of this, the best way to survive in a world where everything could and would kill you is to be aware of those things and to primarily focus on the negative or dangerous aspects of life, which at the time was a lot more common than anything else. And while this bias as a caveman was extremely crucial, in the modern day where almost none of these threats exist, we are still dealing with the consequences of this bias. Just think about it. If there was two cavemen in prehistoric times, one who went on a walk and saw, oh, there's a dangerous thing, I'm not gonna go there. Oh, I stepped on something sharp, this place could be dangerous. I'm gonna go home and remember this and just, keep this in the back of my mind. Versus a caveman that went on a walk and was just like, oh, that's a pretty tree. Oh, cool. That's a cool looking lion running directly towards me. That's majestic. Which of the two do you think is going to survive? And I mean, the answer is kind of obvious. But like I mentioned, tiger attacks and starvation are fortunately not much of a risk for many people today. So we transition this worry and this part of our brain onto other aspects of more modern life. Job security, social status, rejection, failure, the opinions of others. And because the world that we live in is just so complex and there is so much to think about, And because the negativity bias is an instinct so deeply ingrained within our psyche, if you don't consciously try to counteract this negativity bias, it could lead to some very serious consequences. And it's extremely easy to spiral into overthinking and stressing and, coming up with worst case scenarios and ultimately developing things such as anxiety or depression. And a common example of this negativity bias is, once we lay down on our bed and close our eyes, all of a sudden every horrible thing that happened to us ever comes to mind. Keep in mind, in ancient times, before you go to bed, it's helpful to have a checklist of everything you notice today that could be bad, but in modern times, it's just gonna make going to bed harder and possibly damage your self-esteem. And if that was the first time you've ever done something like that, then you probably experienced a lot of fear, specifically fear of the unknown, which is likely one of the oldest human instincts we all have to this very day. Our ancestors had to essentially trial and error every aspect of life always, and the stakes were typically life or death. And because of this, the best way to mitigate as much risk as possible was to simply stick with what you know and avoid what you didn't know, which led to the development of the fear of the unknown. During ancient times, exploring a place that was dark and you couldn't quite see, encountering an animal that you were unfamiliar with, or even seeing weather that you haven't quite seen before, all could very well lead to the death of you and anybody around you. Meaning that the best way to stay alive was to avoid and fear any of these things you were unfamiliar with. And this instinct is still around to this very day. But once again, in modern times, this instinct isn't helpful and is often counterproductive. And while I would definitely say that there is an argument for the fear of the unknown being helpful today, there is still places where it isn't helpful. Specifically when it comes to exploring opportunities that could ultimately be beneficial. Like, let's say, starting a new relationship, trying a new food, going to a new city, moving, meeting new people. In the modern day, when things are so safe and so civilized, there are so many amazing opportunities to come out of exploring the unknown and seeking discomfort and truly trying to overcome this instinct. But the reality is just that. This is an instinct that has to be overcome to experience these things. And because of this, there is a saying that I think is rather accurate, is that most people would rather experience a familiar hell than an unknown heaven. And it's interesting because even though in that hypothetical that the unknown situation would be objectively better, because it's unknown, it's still scarier than dealing with something objectively worse that you're at least familiar with. But it wasn't only the unknown that our ancestors were afraid of. There was actually quite a few fears that our ancestors hold that we still hold today. Another example being the fear of failure. Now, once again, there is instances where this fear is still helpful in the modern day, but as a whole, the exaggerated fear of failure is more detrimental to people than it is helpful. In ancient times, goals were simple and immediate. If you were on a hunt, your goal was to secure an animal. If you're looking to reproduce, your goal is to secure a mate. If you're looking for shelter, your goal is to find a warm and comfortable place. And in all of these instances, if you failed to meet your goal, your life or your bloodline was done. And those stakes are pretty high. And over hundreds of thousands of years of development, our brain began to realize that if we really want something, we cannot accept failure as an option. And while in the modern day, many of our goals are not life or death at all, a lot of people still act like them. Doing worse on an assignment than you anticipated, not getting the promotion you wanted, having an application denied for almost anything. All of these things are uncomfortable and upsetting, but in most cases, they are not life or death. Although some people still act like they are, but it is so ingrained in our being to have that exaggerated fear of failing that typically only holds us back and will cause us to feel a sense of dread when in reality the situation may be mildly infuriating or potentially disappointing, but definitely not life or death. But another consequence of failure in ancient times beyond just immediate death was also a loss of social status. You see, humans have always been tribal people, pack animals, if you will. And within packs or groups, there is a hierarchy. And within hierarchies, there is status, which determines where you stand on the food chain. In ancient times, we were extremely motivated to seek status, not to satisfy our egos, but to ensure our survival. Because in ancient tribes, the higher status individuals typically got the most benefits, the best shelter, the most food, and so on. And the opposite was also true. If you were low status in the tribe, you would be getting scraps. You would be living in the worst of places. And in severe situations, you would be outright outcast from the group, essentially being left for dead. And for that reason, it's reasonable to understand why seeking social status was so important in prehistoric times. But as we all know, this is not a habit that's gone away. And in modern times, people seek status more than ever, while, interestingly, the stakes are much lower. Sure, in the modern day, there is so many benefits to having status. Celebrities, for example, have access to the best of everything. They get treated better than everybody else. They can afford everything and still get things for free. And there are definitely benefits to that in the modern day. day. Although I would argue it doesn't guarantee your survival anymore. Because in the modern day, you don't need social status to live. An entry-level job, a simple side hustle, or even a small business are all things that could sustain you and provide you a comfortable and potentially even abundant life, with status being completely out of the equation. And sure, this drive for status could still give you a better life, but it also could send you on a completely meaningless pursuit that at the end of your life you realize wasn't worth it at all. And I would say in most cases, this drive is almost solely egoic and not survival focused. And I think one of the most common instances that we all experience in regards to this drive for status is how we compare ourselves to others consistently. In a world full of social media, we are force-fed other people's lives on a daily basis. And typically that experience looks like, wow, they're doing better than me. And the reason we do this is because we are perceiving them to be higher status than us. And it means that we are at risk of being evicted from the group and getting less than we may need to survive. And as we know, this mindset of comparison and seeing ourselves as less than others who only present the best parts of their life typically leads to anxiety, depression, and many of the other common consequences of having a primal brain in an extremely advanced world. Which is why I believe this drive to be completely useless, if not counterproductive. Because in most cases, you just feel worse about yourself, even though you are completely capable of surviving and having a meaningful and happy life. But even if you don't crave being a high status individual, you typically at the very least crave fitting in. Which brings us to the next ancient instinct, the human impulse of adopting a herd mentality. As we just mentioned in the previous instinct, humans in tribes were safer, and humans on their own were not. And while climbing the social ladder is one goal, even maintaining where you are is an entirely separate goal. The human brain evolved in tribes and closely monitored the group, copying all of their behavior because they see that these other people are alive, so they're gonna do what these other living, surviving people are doing, because that's really the ultimate goal. And because of that, most people were on the same page. While at the same time, individuals who showed attributes that weren't directly in line with the tribe, whether it be doing something that resulted in their instant death or simply doing something that the tribe didn't approve of, let's say not reciprocating sharing food or not contributing, would result in being exiled, which was essentially a death sentence. If you notice that everybody does one thing and the people who don't do that thing either die or get kicked out of the group, you're going to quickly learn that it's best to do what everybody else is doing and not stray too far from that. In prehistoric times, it meant coexistence. But once again, today, the stakes are not nearly as high. But that doesn't stop our brain from trying to keep us in line with the greater group. Everybody in one shape or another fears rejection. Whether it be talking to somebody you find attractive, trying to sell something, or simply trying to find a place that you belong. Nobody wants to be told no or that they don't fit in. And this is something that we experience from a very young age and most people carry through the rest of their life. And while herd mentality can manifest itself in a lot of ways, it's most commonly experienced by simply not wanting to stand out or make too many waves or rock the boat. So if you ever feel bad about your desire to fit in and want to be somebody else or want to have other attributes so you could be more like others, it's not that you hate yourself or it's not that you're wrong. It's simply the biology of your brain telling you that if you are more like others, you will have a higher chance of living. And while that's not really the case today, your brain doesn't really know the difference. And similar to our fear of the unknown, this herd mentality in most cases in the modern time holds us back rather than protects us. We stop ourselves from pursuing the things we truly love or doing things we really want to do. It stops us from taking risks or doing things that seem out of the norm. The goal of this herd mentality is to keep us alive, not happy. And what that looks like today is simply doing something that you know is safe, even if you don't like to do it, because doing the thing you want to do might not give you that same safe result. And that could apply to a career, a lifestyle, or really anything. Your brain has decided that the safest way to live is going with the path of least resistance. And what that typically looks like is doing what everybody else is doing. And this is an ancient instinct that is very evident in the modern day. Almost as evident, at least, as our need for control. I would say a good majority of people at some point in their life struggle with having a pretty strong to severe need for control in at least some aspect of their life. Whether it be some sort of power trip or perfectionism or simply a sheer need for things to go their way. The ancient human mind craved control because it was predictable, and it craved that simplicity and predictability, and how that manifested was learning to seek order and trying to create a routine in a world that was completely unpredictable, but somehow simultaneously seasonal and cyclical. And how this looked in ancient times was using this need for this control to establish routines that allowed life to exist, following migration patterns of animals that would sustain your tribe's life, understanding the seasons and following weather patterns and predicting what happens when you saw a certain cloud, controlling the amount of wood you put on your fire to ensure it never never went out. All of these actions are rooted in a desire for routine, order, and ultimately control. But in the modern day, this need for control has manifested rather differently. And the biggest way that our need for control hinders us in the modern day is by people trying to control factors that are out of their control. And this need that people feel that ultimately leads them to have extreme stress and anxiety about certain situations. In ancient times, the only thing we could control was our actions. And our need for control was based in our actionable pursuit of living. But in the modern day, with infinite information at our fingertips in a world that is more complex than our brain could ever perceive, this need for control oversteps its usefulness and becomes a hindrance, whether it be just being socially unlikable because you are too bossy, or being unable to enjoy something because it is not to your exact liking, or spending your free time worrying about something that you have no control over simply because you desire it going a certain way. And these negative feelings associated with feeling out of control leads to a negative spiral, because if you feel out of control, you feel weak, you feel less. And it's through these negative emotions that our brain develops pattern recognition, so it knows exactly what to avoid, so it cannot feel bad, so it cannot die. And this brings us to the final instinct on this list. Looking for patterns that are basically not there. This instinct comes from our brain's natural desire to want to make sense of this world we live in. And in prehistoric times, spotting a pattern could make the difference between your existence and your very quick non-existence. If you notice that every time you eat a certain red berry, you throw it violently, you'll probably begin to avoid that. If you notice a pattern of everybody who wrestles with a tiger turning into red jelly, you're not going to wrestle with tigers. And from these examples, we can see the obvious advantage of pattern recognition. It's our brain's quick and easy way to quickly evaluate a situation and whether it should be avoided or pursued. And pattern recognition works both ways. Similar to our sugar craving we mentioned at the beginning of the video, if we see something that we know is sweet, we are going to be motivated to get to it. And on the same token, we may be hesitant to get this honey because we know that while the honey is sweet, the bees are plentiful and they are stinging. In the modern day, pattern recognition is definitely not life or death, but it is an extremely important part of our everyday lives. And this ability to recognize patterns allows us to maintain a lot of free mental bandwidth, because if every time we approached a certain situation we had to reevaluate it from scratch, well, you would be thinking consistently. But if you have a kind of mental catalog of things you could quickly reference every time you see something you've seen before, your mind is able to streamline the process of thinking, which is something your brain's always trying to do. But here's the thing, even though pattern recognition in the modern day can and is extremely helpful in some cases, much like the others we've discussed that are helpful, they typically overstay their welcome and overstep and can be very detrimental. And how pattern recognition typically oversteps in the modern day is by causing us to misinterpret events without context, overthink situations that are not as deep as we think, or jump to conclusions that are not there. And the reason why we do all of these things is because our mind is consistently trying to understand things. So if we have a little bit of context around something, our brain is going to try as hard as possible to try to categorize the unknown with something we know, which is most often seen when people are generalizing things, whether it be about ideas or even people. Our brain wants to seek a pattern so it can reassure itself it knows what's going on here. In ancient times, if you saw an animal with pointy teeth, you didn't need any more context about it. But in modern times, you can see a person with tattoos and go, wow, this is a bad, scary person, I'm going to avoid them. When in reality, the fact that somebody may or may not have tattoos means absolutely nothing about their character and who this person may be. But our ancient brain that we possess wants to keep us safe and wants to generalize as much as possible, to quickly process information and to conserve as much energy as possible. And that wasn't a knock at people with tattoos. I have tattoos myself, they're just under my red shirt. But it's an old-timey stereotype that I thought would make sense. And by this point of the video, you've probably already begun to recognize some patterns yourself. One pattern is that all of the entries on this list are actually intertwined and typically work off of each other to help your brain do its best to understand things quickly and survive. But another pattern I want to suggest is that our brain is just doing the best it can. It's obvious that our brain has evolved to be as beneficial as possible, and our brain has done an extremely good job of developing an operating system that is optimized to keep us alive in the prehistoric world. However, while we have had a brain that has had hundreds and thousands of years to develop to a certain style of life, over the last few thousand years, our civilization has developed rapidly at a pace that our brain is simply not able to catch up to, which has landed us in the situation that we are in now. We are living in an extremely advanced society using powerful hardware that have a outdated operating system, and we're just trying to make it all work. But the bright side is this. While our brain still has instincts within it that are no longer helpful and sometimes hurtful to us, we still have the power and ability to overcome these ancient instincts. With awareness, focus, and intention, you can consciously make an effort to begin to personally reprogram your brain to be more suited to live in the modern day. And these are things that we've already began to do, whether it be consciously or unconsciously. And at the end of the day, our brain is our friend, and our instincts are trying their best to keep us alive. The world we live in is just a little bit different than what our brain is used to. So we've got to kind of update the software on our own, but that's kind of just part of the journey. So if you've been struggling with any of these things that I've talked about in this video, whether it be a craving for sugar, trying to fit in, feeling bad about other people being higher status than you, or craving control, realize that you're not broken and you're not wrong. You're simply experiencing the ancient programming that your brain has developed over hundreds of thousands of years of existence. But understand that this doesn't define you and that you can have a conscious impact on how your brain operates moving forward with enough intention and effort. Things you pay for that actually used to be free. It is a crisp Saturday morning, and you are waking up excited because you know that today is the day they open the Christmas market. You love local vendors, knickknacks, fresh foods, and of course, community functions, which is why you quickly get out of bed, get ready, and head on to the Christmas market. Craft fairs and events are so fun. However, they used to be more fun because once upon a time, they weren't so expensive. Let me explain. As soon as you approach the event center in your car, you notice your first issue. While the event center has plenty of parking, none of it is available for free. Which brings us to the first thing that used to be free that now we have to pay for. Parking. Admittedly, it's been a long time since general parking has been free, and this may come as a shock to even the older Trust Me Bro viewers. But believe it or not, once upon a time, most, if not all, public parking was free. But this all began to change, at least in the United States, in the 1930s, specifically January of 1935, when Oklahoma City installed its first parking meter. Parking meters, of course, are the things you ignore when you park somewhere publicly. Joking, they are the place you put in coins so you can voluntarily scam yourself to place your car somewhere to go spend money at a business. I don't necessarily have a personal vendetta against parking meters. However, I do think they're a bit of a net negative for people that are doing some local shopping trying to stimulate the local economy, at least in the modern day. Because sure, in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, there was really nothing besides brick and mortar, unless you count the Sears catalog. However, going to an in-person store was still very much so the rage. But now, in 2025, when you have Amazon and other online retailers, why would you spend money to park somewhere to then go buy something if you could, well, just order it online and get it to your door shipped for free? Now, to be fair, the whole parking lot business has always existed, opening a private parking lot with the sole intention of charging for parking. However, what I'm more specifically referring to here is either public government-owned parking lots or private parking lots owned by businesses now charging as well. As I stated, in 1935, the first parking meter was invented and used by the government, and that invention quickly spread across the entire nation. But it wasn't until the 1950s where other locations started charging for parking as well, more specifically, airports. In the early days of aviation, parking at airports was free, and it was also rather simple. It was typically just a large patch of grass beside the airport that, leave your car, no worries. But as the demand for travel began to ramp up after World War II, airport parking began to develop more, and quickly airports realized that, hey, while parking is a great value add, it's also something we can monetize. And monetize they did. And quickly, within a span of only a few decades, airports went from offering free parking to having parking be one of their major revenue generation streams. But because you're an event center in 2025 and not an airport in the 1950s, you submit to your reality, pay to park your car, and begin to head into the event center to experience the Christmas market. As you enter the event center, you feel the wave of warm air and your nostrils are full of Christmas cheer. And it's not, because it was cold out. But before you can even reach the first vendor of this Christmas market, you are met with a table. And behind this table are two middle-aged women named Tammy and Karen. And Tammy and Karen run this Christmas market. And they're not letting you into this craft show until you pay the fee. Which brings us to our next entry that actually used to be free. Admission to craft fair and, well, a lot of public events. For craft fairs and markets alike, there's no specific date when every event organizer decided to charge a cover. However, it's become extremely obvious that over the past few decades, the trend of charging a cover to even enter a market to support local business has become more and more common. And I'm assuming many of my market goers can attest to this. Now, I want to make it very clear that there are still a ton of free markets in the modern day. And there is a small number of markets that simply charge a cover fee to directly support a charity that they are also contributing to. And that I'm fine with. However, in the vast majority of cases, it seems like more and more markets and events in general are simply charging a cover every year to optimize revenue generation. Now here's the deal. I'm not knocking the hustle. I'm a business bro. If you want to charge for people to come into your event, that's totally fine. But I think it's important that we understand the context. A $5 cover at a local nightclub versus the $5 cover at a local Christmas market are two different things, at least in my opinion. And if you want to maximize the number of patrons in your market to ensure that your vendors are able to become profitable, well, I would try to make sure that people can get in for free. And personally, I think the best way to go about this is have entry be free and also make donations optional. That way people are aware of the charity and can give if they'd like without being obligated. But regardless, back to Tammy and Karen. Upon becoming face to face with Tammy and Karen, you know there's no way around the situation besides paying them. Because their ugly Christmas sweaters have made it obvious that they're willing to lay their life on the line to ensure you pay admission. However, after paying for parking and after paying Tammy and Karen, you are relieved to be in the place you've been excited about all day. However, you've just been hit with one major issue. With this being a local small town market, you're going to need cash to buy your favorite trinkets. And because of the fees you've already paid, your cash supply is looking low. However, you're in luck because as soon as you notice that your wallet is essentially empty, you notice something in your peripheral. A beautiful, shiny ATM. And this ATM brings us to our next charge that actually used to be free. You see, the first ATM prototypes were invented in the 1960s, but it wasn't until the late 1970s and early 1980s when ATMs began popping up around the United States. During the early days of ATM machines, that being the late 80s and early 90s, ATMs were nearly exclusively owned by banks and either charged an extremely low fee of roughly 10 cents or no fee at all as a free perk to customers of a certain bank. And this tradition is still true to this day. Many of you, if you go to your bank's specific ATM, can take out cash absolutely free, and that's great. However, when you're out and about, or, at a Christmas market or your favorite gentleman's club, you're not going to your bank's branded ATM machine. You're going to a sketchy gray box that is begging for your credit card information. Now look, independent ATMs have been around nearly as long as ATMs in general. However, everything changed for ATM fees in 1996. And the reason for this is because prior to April of 1996, independent ATM owners were actually banned for charging a surcharge on transactions. Meaning that if you were in a public place before 1996, you may receive a charge for using an ATM, but the charge that you were receiving was from your bank for not using their ATM, which admittedly is already sneaky because banks were like, hey, use our ATM, they're free. But if you use anybody else's, we're gonna charge you for using their machine. Wild. Regardless, after a major industry ruling in April of 1996, the ban was lifted, meaning that independent ATM operators could now charge their own direct surcharge on their machines as well. And this opened the floodgates for basically voluntary extortion. Because now, if you're using a generic ATM owned by an independent person, not only are you paying your bank for a foreign fee for not using their own branded ATM, but now you're paying the ATM owner a separate fee, meaning that you're paying two separate fees just to take out cash. And if you're only taking out 20 bucks, for example, you could be paying nearly 20 to 40% of that additionally in fees just to get that cash, which is ridiculous. In 1998, the average combined fee from both the bank and the ATM owner was $1.97 per transaction. However, in 2025, this average has now gone up to $4.86 per transaction just to receive cash from a generic ATM, which of course is the most common. I know this one's a bit on the line because technically there are still free ATMs if you're willing to drive across town, and ATMs themselves were never really free because of the foreign fee your bank charged. However, I think it's kind of obvious to see why this entry fits on this list, because once upon a time, ATMs were cheap and only had one fee. Now, ATM fees have quadrupled, and you're getting charged by multiple merchants just to get cash you already have. This isn't a loan. This is literally your money. Feeling like you're not ready for another scam right now, you actually cancel the transaction after seeing a $20 ATM fee, and you make your way out of the event space. Disappointed because your Christmas market experience was ruined. But it's not gonna ruin your day. You get back into your car after you already paid for parking, and you decide you're going to go to a national park and enjoy some pure nature. Almost immediately after leaving the parking lot, you realize that one of your tires is low and your gas tank is nearly empty. However, luckily, a gas station is not far away. As you pull into the gas station, you find the air pump and park directly in front of it, running into the next thing that used to be free but isn't anymore. As you get out of your car and approach the air pump, you see a price tag, $1.50 for 4 minutes of air. Now, this isn't the most expensive thing you've ever done, but come on, we're paying for air now? And sure, of course, you're paying to use this air compressor. However, this is a gas station and they're already hyper optimized for revenue. They have gas, lottery, tobacco, alcohol, fake labubus. They've got it all. And of course, chips. I think most of the people watching this video have always had to pay for air if they've ever had to pay for air. However, there was a time when these air compressors for putting air in your tire were a free service that in some cases they would even do for you. But we'll get to that in a second. Prior to the 1970s, it was basically commonplace to be offering free air at any gas station. However, during the 1970s, charging for air became more and more of a thing. And it wasn't until the 1990s when it was basically commonplace to be charging 25 cents to $1 for compressed air. And now in the modern day, there is literally air pumps that accept credit cards. And who knows, maybe they'll start accepting crypto soon too. Just think of that utopian future, spending 10,000 poop coin to put air in your tires. What a dream. However, when it comes to compressed air, there is a bit of a silver lining, and some of you are already typing a comment about it right now. And that silver lining is that some states in the United States, while they allow you to charge for compressed air, require that you offer compressed air for free if asked. That's right, this is a scam you can actually work around. If you pull up to an air pump at a gas station and they're charging for air, simply go inside, use your charisma to pass a speech check, and they will turn on the compressor absolutely free, at least in some places where they're required to. As you finish airing up your tire, you pull your car into the bay and begin filling your car with gasoline. Which brings us to our next gas station related thing you pay for that used to be free. But in this case, you don't pay for it, you just don't get it anymore. That being a service. You see, prior to the 1970s, full service gas stations were all the rage. And at these gas stations, not only would they pump your gas for you, but they would also wipe your windows and even check your tire pressure. And this honestly sounds dope and like a good move for safety. Because imagine if you pull up to get gas and somebody who's knowledgeable about cars takes a quick look at your tires, realize there's either a nail in it or your tires are literally bald, and even just, suggests, hey, get that fixed soon, but for now I just topped up the air. That could literally save lives. But of course, it costs money, so it'll never work. As I mentioned earlier, in the 1970s, there was a large transition from full-service gas stations to self-serve gas stations. And with this change came a lot less service and a lot more charges. Now, of course, in the modern day, there are still a few full-serve gas stations that exist. However, gas at these stations are always more expensive, and tipping culture has basically made that experience, well, awkward or more expensive than it probably should be. But yeah, even though you can still technically wash your windows with the dirtiest, stinkiest fluid you've ever seen for free, there was a point in time when if you were getting gas, the gas station was so grateful for your business that they would fill your car for you, clean your window for you, top off your tires, and maybe even tell you that your pinstripe suit looked good. But obviously it's not all sunshine and rainbows, because literally during this time in the 60s and 70s, leaded gasoline was a big thing. And if you don't know what leaded gasoline was doing to people, well, watch some of my serial killer videos. After leaving the gas station, you are finally back on the road and headed to your fortunately local national park. As you drive up the heavily wooded road, you get to the entrance of the park. And as you meet the employee in the little box, you are given a small map, and then they are asking you to pay the admission. Obviously, paying an admission at a national park is commonplace, but that wasn't always the case. Prior to 1972, basically every national park in the United States was free to enter and even camp in. Until, of course, that changed forever. Now, not every national park was free. As a rule, there was a few that were charging small fees, but a vast majority of national parks were completely free to enter and use. However, in 1972, a federal law was amended that authorized recreational fees for every national park. And since 1972, everything has essentially flipped to where now over 111 national parks in the United States charge an entrance fee. And these fees range from $10 to $35 per vehicle, depending on the park. Now, once again, the silver lining is that there are free days at certain parks at certain times, but obviously it is still a stark contrast. Now, once again, I'm not hating on this, and everything on this list isn't like a personal statement, it's just a fact. It used to be free and now it's not. I'm not against national parks having better management and better upkeep. However, with national parks, at least in the United States, for example, being federally operated, it does seem a bit ironic that tax dollars are supposed to be spent on maintaining these parks, but instead we are now paying taxes and also paying to maintain these parks additionally with their taxes, once again being double dipped on fees. But with that being said, if national parks are underfunded and need to charge, well, I'm not against it, because national parks are important and deserve to be well maintained. But just know, prior to 1972, they were free. Here's the deal. You kind of forgot that you had no cash, so embarrassingly, you had to turn around. Fortunately, out of pity, the ranger lets you keep the map and you drive home. As you get back home, you decide that you're just done with the day. The market you were looking forward to was a bust, the park was a bust, and it's now time to just sit on the couch and watch some TV for a bit bit and really decompress. That is, until you realize that none of the channels that you typically watch are working. And then you get an email on your phone saying that your cable has been suspended because of a failed payment. Which, surprisingly, brings us to our next thing that used to actually be free. You see, before the days of streaming services and overpriced TV channels, television broadcasting as a whole was free. In the early days of television, from roughly the 1930s to 1950s, regular TV broadcasts were free, either being funded by advertisements or, more commonly, public funds. And how the setup would work essentially is if you bought a TV and had an antenna, you could access these channels and have free entertainment on your brand new television ready to go. And this, for decades, was the standard and provided anybody with an antenna access to channels like ABC, NBC, CBS, PBS, and other local channels. Now, granted, these free options still exist to this very day. However, good luck trying to be genuinely entertained by only using free television options. Because even back in the 50s, people were getting bored of that pretty quick, which is why TV began to quickly shift into a monthly paid model, specifically in the 1970s and 80s. What happened during this time with the introduction of cable TV was the additional introduction of specialized channels. And these specific channels focused on things like news or sports and were funded solely by subscription fees and, once again, advertisements. And since that introduction of paid channels in the 1970s and 80s, media streaming has changed forever and evolved quite rapidly since then. And it's kind of ironically evolving so quickly that it's almost repeating itself. And what I mean by that is in the late 2000s and early 2010s, there was a movement online known as cutting the cable, which was exactly what it sounded like. People were fed up because they were paying so many subscriptions just to watch TV. And it truly was getting egregious and expensive, and people had to really make some tough decisions about what channels they were going to subscribe to. It was around the same time when digital streaming was becoming more and more popular, and it was starting to seem like streaming could be a potential alternative to traditional TV. And while it did for some time, I think for the most part it's just kind of repeating itself, because now so many people are subscribed to so many different streaming services at once, they're not even saving money. And now we no longer have specialized channels, we have specialized streaming services, all available on your smart TV. It was reported in a study from 2023 that the average household in America is subscribed to at least 4 subscription services. And with most services being anywhere from $5 to $15 per month, we can average it out to roughly $40 per month, or almost $500 a year in subscription services. I personally have no beef with streaming services, but it is ironic how quickly streaming turned from an alternative to TV to the new TV with the internet. After feeling enraged that the only source of comfort has been suspended because of your lack of funds, you realize that you at least can make your payment without using cash or even leaving your home. So you quickly pick up the phone and dial your cable provider. And they tell you that yes, they could totally take a separate credit card over the phone to reinstate your services. And while this sounds all fine and dandy, this actually brings us to our next, no longer free service. You see, before the 2000s, you could pay most of your bills via the phone, and that was one of the most convenient ways of doing so, because the internet was still early and paying bills was more of a hassle than it is today. But interestingly, as online billing became more and more common, companies wanted to deal with over-the-phone bill payments as little as possible. Originally, because over-the-phone bill payments cost more money, because they had to have a live agent to receive this information and input it. And while that alone is a bit egregious because, well, you're already paying for the larger service, so that small service should be included considering how little time that one transaction takes. What's even more egregious and kind of hilarious is that after real phone attendants were replaced with automated systems, these companies still continue to charge for any bill payment being made over the phone, which is just hilarious. This one might seem like it doesn't really affect anybody because who pays bills over the phone anymore? But realize that just because something doesn't affect you, that doesn't mean it doesn't affect anyone. And for example, just imagine your sweet old grandmother who likes to pay all her bills over the phone because to her, it's still the most convenient way. Well, in the late 90s and early 2000s, that was completely fine. But now, let's say she's paying 5 different bills over the phone, with each of these bills having an additional $5 to $10 over the phone fee. Your sweet old grandmother could be paying an extra $25 to $50 per month just on fees for literally making her payment to things she already pays for. I don't know about you, but that's not really cool in my book. But regardless of what anybody thinks, it used to be free and it's not anymore. After being told that paying your bill over the phone will result in an extra charge, you decide that it's better to just let the cable default and you can put your energy elsewhere, which is exactly when you notice your Xbox controller on your table. You decide that if you can't watch TV, playing video games games is the second best way to truly blow off some steam. However, as soon as you load up the latest Call of Duty, you realize there is a serious problem with gaming. You see, video games never were free per se. However, the video game industry has definitely taken a stark turn ever since microtransactions came around. And no, I'm not talking about mobile apps charging 99 cents to have the full game unlocked. I'm talking about $100 AAA titles begging you to spend an additional $40 on extra skins and DLCs, while also on top of that paying an additional $20 per month for a battle pass. And I'm talking in Canadian dollars, and I'm looking at you, Call of Duty. Like, here's the deal. Video games are expensive, but they're not even complete anymore. Not only are video games, for the most part, released basically unfinished, but they also always drop with additional content that you have to pay extra for, as if the price of the game is not enough. When I was growing up, I loved playing MW2 on the PS3, and it was simple. Get headshots, unlock camos, it was fun and simple, it made perfect sense. Now, if you play Call of Duty, you can unlock some basic camos, but to get the really cool ones in the blueprints and the skins, you can get the battle pass for a monthly subscription, or buy them outright with cash, or you can even buy and stack up your COD points, which has a crazy looking currency because of the acronym. Regardless, within our lifetimes, video games went from being full products with one price to being full games that you could buy additional add-ons later when they decided to create new content for the game, you know, DLCs that were actually additive and worth the money, to now having video games that are both paid and free, doing everything that they can to A, steal your information, and B, make you spend as much money as possible. Like, it's one thing having a free game have additional extras. For example, you know, Fortnite. I think Fortnite's at least reasonable because you can enjoy Fortnite fully, completely free. And there's a lot of user-generated games on there that you can play for free. And sure, there's an item shop that updates daily. If you have at least a bit of self-discipline, you don't have to spend money on there. Although it's definitely a slippery slope. However, with Call of Duty, for example, there is, in my opinion, no excuse to have a full-priced game have so much paid content on top. But if you haven't noticed, this was one of the entries that definitely has affected me personally, which is why it was a bit more passion-filled. But here's the thing. I know my audience, and I know that this was probably one of the most impactful on you guys too, because this literally changed in our lifetimes. This wasn't free in the 70s and paid for now. This was literally, hey, games used to be one price, and now it's a cover charge, a surcharge, and everything in between. Basically, everything we've talked about in all of the other sections has happened within gaming in the last 1 to 2 decades, and it's crazy. And it's for this reason that you put down the controller, you turn off Call of Duty, and you decide that you're going to just take a vacation, because you are done with being charged for things that used to be free. And while it may seem crazy for somebody with no money to go on vacation, what's even crazier is the fact that nearly 75% of you watching this video right now are not even subscribed. So I just wanted to say, if you're enjoying these videos and want to see cool videos from me weekly, consider subscribing. And if you are subscribed, consider turning on notifications so you know exactly when I post. And maybe you can get the first comment, because everybody loves people that comment first. But let's move on. Deciding to put your full tires and full tank of gas to good use, you drive yourself to the airport, where you once again get scammed to pay to park, and then you head inside. As of right now, you have no tickets, so you head to the kiosk and begin the process of losing all of your money. The first question that the kiosk asked you is if you are going to be checking a bag. And because you wanted to leave and never came back, you did have a bag you wanted to check. And after ticking off that box, you were instantly met with an additional charge, that being a bag checking charge. And this charge is actually relatively recent. You see, airlines only started charging for checked bags, at least in the US, in 2008, with American Airlines being the first major carrier to introduce this fee on domestic flights. The fee was, air quotes, only $15, but now with this fee essentially being an industry standard and only going up over the last decade, checking bags has gone from being something that was part of your ticket price to now being a scam you can't escape. In 2025, checked bags can range from anywhere from $25 to $60 per bag you check, and that can increase exponentially depending on how heavy your luggage is. And assuming that your original ticket price was only $100 for a short domestic flight, it is now 60% more expensive with a $100 ticket price and now a $60 checked bag fee, and we're only just getting started. After being asked if you wanted to check any bags, the kiosk now asks you if you want to select your seat. Obviously, you don't want to sit just anywhere, so you opt to select your seat. And while at first this may seem like an easy, free feature because it's a first-come, first-served system, you would be gravely mistaken. Because once again, around 2008, airlines started experimenting with charging for seat selection, seeing it as an upsell rather than a common courtesy for people that were booking early. And once again, almost like everything else on this list, something that started out as an experimental charge has now become a significant revenue stream for nearly every major airline. And now, after selecting your seat, you have an additional $20 charge on your original $100 plane ticket. Now that your plane ticket is 80% more expensive than it was originally advertised at, you're certain that it couldn't get any worse. That is, until you're met with the next question: would you like to eat on the flight? And considering the fact you'd be trapped in a metal tube for 6 hours, you decide that eating would be good. But of course, it would not be free. See, most domestic airlines within the United States offer at least some sort of snack on most flights, whether it be a small glass of water or a bag of small peanuts. However, did you know that in the United States, even short domestic flights were offered free meals for the longest time? So when do you think that domestic in-flight meals went from free to paid? Well, the answer, sadly, is 2001. Prior to 2001, almost every flight that was taken, whether it be short haul, long haul, domestic, international, included some sort of free meal. Not snack, meal. However, after 2001, many changes took place, with the one that we're discussing right now being the removal of complimentary meals for any flight that wasn't a long haul international flight. Because those are literally required. Because if you're going in between countries and spending over 8 hours in the sky, they kind of have to feed you. But if you're taking a domestic flight in the US, good luck getting a meal without paying for it. And once again, you pay for this additional add-on, and you have now officially doubled the price of your plane ticket in only 3 clicks by purchasing add-ons for your flight that were all free not even 20 years ago. Except for the meals, but you know what I mean. And with that, you pay for your ticket, print it out, and you go on your lovely vacation. But now you might be asking yourself, hey, wait, in this story, the character walked out of the Christmas market because there's an ATM fee, he turned around at the national park because there was an entrance fee, and he canceled his cable bill because he had no money in his account. Why did you just all of a sudden buy every add-on on the flight? And the answer is truly quite simple. The credit card he used wasn't his. And while credit card fraud and identity theft are no laughing matter, in this hypothetical story, they allowed you to go on vacation stress-free. Totally wrong facts that people still believe. The flat earth fallacy. Okay, we all know that the earth is flat, right? I'm obviously joking, and I'll save the tinfoil hat for another day. But what I'm referring to isn't flat earthers in the modern day, but it's the flat earth belief that was held by people in the Middle Ages, specifically around the time when Christopher Columbus took his infamous journey across the ocean. Obviously, during the Middle Ages, it was believed that the earth was flat and that if you were to sail too far in the wrong way in the ocean, you could literally fall off the earth. And it was for this reason that Christopher Columbus wanted to prove these people wrong and risked his life sailing the opposite way to India to prove that the earth was round and not flat, going against the primary belief at that time. Now, what if I told you that everything you just heard about that situation is not true whatsoever? It is actually a rather popular misconception. Let me explain. While Christopher Columbus did sail across the ocean to prove a point, the point he was not trying to prove was that the earth wasn't flat. The point he was trying to prove was that the earth wasn't as big as some people suspected. It is historical fact that not only Christopher Columbus, but basically any educated individual during the 1400s knew that the earth wasn't flat and was in fact round. And this knowledge dates back far before Christopher Columbus or even the Middle Ages entirely. Some of the first recorded suggestions that the earth may be round actually date all the way back to the 6th century BC with the Greek philosopher Pythagoras. And later in the 4th century BC, Aristotle even agreed and supported this theory, citing one personal observation that he noticed every time he traveled southward, southern constellations would be higher in the sky. But this, of course, wasn't the only evidence we had of the Earth being round. During this time, we also had recorded observations of lunar eclipses showing a round shadow on the moon from Earth, and of course, numerous eyewitness accounts of mountains seemingly growing out of the ground on the horizon as you approach them, or seeing a ship seemingly submerge into the water as it sails into the ocean. My point is that we've had a lot of evidence that the Earth is round, and it dates back far, like way before the Middle Ages and even way before the Common Era. But just to further validate this point, in the 3rd century BC, it wasn't just a suggestion that the Earth may be round. At this point, it was basically a known fact to anybody in the educated community. And philosophers and scientists were not so much focused on the shape of the Earth, but the size of the Earth. And potentially, most impressively, at this time, the head librarian of the Library of Alexandria, Eratosthenes, was able to estimate the circumference of the Earth with 99% accuracy. And while that estimate wasn't proven to be extremely accurate until much later, it still goes to show that there was a lot of evidence suggesting that not only was the world not flat very long ago, but that people were well aware that the Earth was not flat. Which brings us back to our original point. No, Christopher Columbus did not think that he was potentially going to fall off the world, and nobody who was educated or even slightly paying attention thought that either. And while seemingly flat earthers have existed in every era of history, they're as ridiculous today as they were back in 1492. So, what was the point of this entire expedition? Well, like I mentioned earlier, Columbus didn't believe the mainstream theory of how big the Earth was. And his goal with the support from Queen Elizabeth was not to prove that the Earth was round or not to see what was beyond the edge of the Earth, but to potentially find a more quick and efficient trade route between Europe and Asia to optimize international trade. And of course, we all know what happened from there on out, and well, here we are. So yeah, the suggestions from people in the Middle Ages believing the Earth was flat are actually modern misinformation, with this myth being brought to the mainstream in the 1700s and 1800s. And unfortunately today, stick figures on the internet still need to undo all of this misinformation. But in case you wanted a real misconception that was believed during the Middle Ages, I'll give you one. A lot of people during this time suspected that the sun rotated around the Earth. That was until Nicholas Copernicus came around and suggested that maybe the Earth rotated around our sun. And he did so not with observable evidence, but with a mathematical model that was not only hard to argue, but was eventually proven true. The Mount Everest myth. If learning that the Earth is actually round blew your mind, then this is about to shatter it. Everybody and their grandmother's grandmother knows that Mount Everest is by far the tallest mountain in the entire world. But what if I told you that actually wasn't the case? Now, before you think I'm lying, let me just confirm that yes, Mount Everest has the highest peak above sea level in the entire world. The peak of Mount Everest is 29,029 feet above sea level, and it is confirmed the tallest peak around the globe. But what if I told you that there was another mountain that was technically taller? If you're confused, don't worry, because I'm about to make it all make sense. Introducing Mauna Kea, a dormant volcano on the island of Hawaii. Looking at this mountain, it's relatively impressive, but only stands at roughly 13,800 feet above sea level, meaning that it's tall, but it's obviously not taller than Mount Everest. That is, unless you measured from base to peak. And this is where this technicality comes into play, because Mauna Kea is kind of like an iceberg, and there's a lot more than meets the eye. Specifically, the 20,000 feet of mountain that exists under the ocean. That's right, unlike Mount Everest, the base of Mauna Kea is submerged deep underwater. And it's for that reason that while from base to tip, it is technically 4,000 feet taller than Mount Everest, due to the fact that most of it is actually underwater, it will unfortunately never claim the title of tallest mountain simply because it has a pretty significant disadvantage of existing in an ocean. It's almost like you were 6'5" and you went to a tall guy competition. But in order to compete, you had to stand in a 5-inch hole, meaning that you were only 6 foot. And while the person you were competing was standing on flat ground and was only 6'1" tall, well, guess what? This other guy is technically taller than you, even if you have a few inches underground. But I have a feeling this one might be a bit controversial, so let me know what you think. Does anything below sea level not count, even if it is part of the mountain's base? Or is Mauna Kea an underdog that deserves more attention? Because realistically, base to tip, it is the tallest mountain in the entire world. I'll let you guys duke it out in the comments, but if you ever want to be the most annoying person in the world, next time you hear somebody claim that Mount Everest is the tallest mountain in the world, make sure to confidently and rudely tell them, no, actually, Mount Everest has the tallest peak in the world, but Mauna Kea is the tallest base to tip. And in case that doesn't kill the mood at the party, well, then just tell them how much you hate pineapple on pizza, because those people are annoying too. The hot-headed hoax. One experience I had when I was younger that I think we all share is the experience of being a kid and not wanting to wear a coat. There was just so many times where it was cold out, but I didn't want to wear a coat. I had no logical explanation, I just didn't feel like wearing that restrictive device. But every single time, Mama Bro made me wear my coat and we went about our day. But it wasn't always a coat I was apprehensive to wear. Sometimes it was hats and gloves. Which brings me to the myth at play. My mom used to tell me that you have to wear a hat when it's cold out because 80% of the heat from your body leaves through your head. And for that reason, you need to insulate it to ensure you are fully warm. And I know for a fact, my mom wasn't the only person to say that. And if I was a betting man, I would say that your mom probably did too. But whether it was a family member or a loved one or a friend or even just the news article, the reality is this. Your head is not some elusive chimney that is dead set on lowering your body's core temperature. But before we use facts to completely debunk this myth, let's actually trace back the origins of it. And it's not that long ago. The most commonly accepted origin of this myth dates back to the 1970s in a US Army survival manual, where in that survival manual, it claims that covering your head is a necessity in the cold because, quote, 40 to 45% of body heat is lost from the head. And while you think a US Army survival manual would be a relatively reputable source for this sort of information, this is one thing they got wrong. But at this point, you might be asking yourself, where did they even get this number or this theory? How did they come up with 40 to 45% of your body heat being lost through your head? And well, those roots date back to the 1950s, where the US military was doing tests on volunteers dressed in Arctic survival suits and were exposed to bitterly cold conditions. And the point of this test was to see where the body was losing most heat in these suits to better help optimize them. And during this flawed analysis, one thing that the scientists realized was that, most of the body heat in these volunteers is being lost through their head. But as you can see, these Arctic survival suits do not include hats, meaning that logically the head would lose the most exposed heat, not because it is some crazy part of the body, it's just the fact that the head was not covered. And scientists who went back to analyze this data have even been recorded to say, quote, if the experiment had been performed with people only wearing swim trunks, then they would have lost no more than 10% of the heat through their heads. And it's almost hard to believe that such a simple seeming logical fallacy would exist in such a professional place, you know, a literal military survival test. But I suppose this one was overlooked because, yeah, if your entire body is insulated and only your head is exposed to the elements, your head definitely will lose the most amount of heat. Not because your head is vulnerable, but because the head was the only part that was literally exposed to the elements. So here's the facts. While it may seem logical that your head may be more vulnerable because of the lack of fat and the abundance of blood vessels, the reality is that heat escapes from all parts of the human body at a similar rate per square inch. And while in your own personal experience, it may seem like your head is the primary source of your heat loss in cold weather, as we saw in the military test, it's not necessarily because your head is extra vulnerable, it's because typically your head is the least insulated with clothing. So yeah, is it a good idea to wear a hat or a toque on a cold day? Definitely. But is it because your head loses much more heat than the rest of your body? No, your head is just more vulnerable because most people aren't wearing toques all the time. And even if you are wearing a toque, it's very unlikely that you're insulating your head like you're insulating your chest, because you could put on a coat and insulate your entire torso. But unless you're wearing a balaclava and ski goggles, your head is always going to be less insulated. Not biologically, but by choice. The cold conundrum. Okay, since we're already on the topic of cold weather and stuff your mom told you, I figured this would be the perfect follow-up. And the follow-up in question is the interesting fact that you can get sick from being exposed to the cold. Logically, it makes sense. It's called a cold, you get it from being cold. What else is there to question? That is logical fact. But what if I was to be so bold to suggest that it wasn't the cold weather that was directly causing flu season to affect people? And I know it may sound blasphemous to your grandmother, but going outside without a hat or with wet hair isn't going to cause you to catch pneumonia. So what's the real scoop? Well, for starters, it's proven that you can't get an infectious or viral disease simply from being exposed to cold temperatures. However, you can get hypothermia, but that's different. So why do seemingly so many people catch colds or the flu as soon as the seasons start to change? There has to be something to it. And the fact of the matter is, there is something to it, but it's a lot more than meets the eye. You see, just because you don't develop a flu upon first contact with a cool breeze, doesn't mean that there's not factors at play that cause the typical flu season. And while temperatures getting cooler may be the most obvious and seemingly guilty culprit, it's really one of the least. And some of the more unlikely culprits are the following. Firstly, reduced vitamin D levels, because as winter approaches, people are spending less time outside, the sun is seen less in most parts of the world, and as a result, your vitamin D levels are below what they should be. On top of this, during cooler months, overall air humidity is lowered, and it has been proven that lower humidity can increase your risk of rhinoviruses. And thirdly, rhinoviruses are typically spread through direct person-to-person contact, or by inhaling small droplets in the air, which is gross. But these things can only take place when you're coming in contact with people, typically in an enclosed environment. And during colder months, we typically spend more time inside, meaning that there's more risk of exposure. And when you combine all three of these factors all happening at the same time, it's not really hard to understand how more people could be more susceptible to diseases at a certain time of year, regardless of the outside temperature. So to settle the debate once and for all, does direct cold exposure cause you to get sick? No. But does every aspect of winter covertly try to get you sick? I would say yes. Meaning that just because you're safe from a cold breeze doesn't mean you're safe from a cold. Bubblegum bewilderment. Okay, admittedly, this entry is a bit less serious, but I think it's definitely the most universal, and call it a playground fact if you will, because I believe that almost everybody watching this video either believed or at least heard of this next fact, which is that if you swallow chewing gum, it will stay in your stomach for 7 years. Or, you know, some variation of that. And if you've ever heard this, well, I'm about to give you the full scoop. And if you still believe this, well, I'm about to blow your mind. Obviously, because I'm talking about this in this video, the gum does not stay in your body for 7 years. It actually stays in your digestive system for over 20 years. That is a joke. It does not at all. You see, it is true that gum is indigestible. Your body can simply not break it down and process it. But that does not mean that your body can't pass it through. And believe it or not, you probably eat a lot of things that your body can simply not digest. And if you don't believe me, well, two popular examples are corn and sunflower seeds. And don't even get me started on indigestible fibers. Keep in mind, your body is resilient. And just imagine all the stuff that our ancient stomachs had to deal with. And just think about all the things your body had to deal with when you were a kid. You know, swallowing Lego and eating Polly Pocket pieces. Or possibly even shoving those light bright right things up your nose. Regardless, your body in one way or another is able to deal with pretty interesting situations. It is for that reason that gum in your digestive tract, at least on rare occasions, is not a concern. But it does in fact differ from standard digestion. Let me explain. In the context of normal food items, there is a 3-step process that every food must go through before it can be digested. First, your food must be, of course, chewed. And this chewing process not only breaks down food, but also increases its surface area, which is directly beneficial for the next step of the process, which is actually executed by your saliva. Your saliva covers these small pieces of food, and with its now increased surface area, your saliva's enzymes are able to break it down even further. And once the food is properly chewed and salivated, it is then sent to your stomach for the final stage of processing, where your stomach acid turns all of your food into a smooth mush that your digestive tract can easily pass through and absorb nutrients out of. And while this is the process for most foods, gum does not play by these rules at all. For starters, you can chew gum all day long, and the breakdown it's going to experience is minimal. And the vast majority of people will spit out their gum before it'll ever begin to break down into smaller pieces. But even if you did intentionally chew your gum into smaller pieces, it's not going to affect what happens in the next 2 stages. You see, chewing gum is made out of both natural and synthetic polymers. And it's for this reason that the gum cannot be broken down by either your saliva or your stomach acid. And that's honestly a good thing, because if your body was able to break down the polymers for your digestive tract to absorb it, you would get very sick. So be grateful it's kind of immune to those processes. But regardless, now that you have intact gum, not only in your stomach, but now in your digestive tract, what happens? Well, like any other food product, it'll slowly make its way through your digestive system, potentially getting caught up on the way, but eventually getting its way out, typically in 1 to 2 days. Although gum can be sticky, your body is designed to get rid of even the most stubborn of foods, and that includes chewing gum. But I will say this, even though chewing gum won't stay in your stomach for 7 years like you might have thought on the playground, it's not recommended that you start swallowing it en masse. And that's because if you do swallow enough chewing gum, you can develop something that's known as a bezoar, which is just essentially a blockage in your digestive tract, which can be painful, dangerous, and even deadly if left untreated. So no, chewing gum does not stay in your body for numerous years, although it's not recommended you try it for yourself. The chameleon con. I'm about to take you on an emotional roller coaster, but spoiler alert, it has a happy ending, so buckle up. We all know that chameleons can change color. That is their claim to fame, and I am not going to take that from them. That is an undisputed fact. But the thing that I will dispute is the fact that they do this for camouflage purposes. In almost every cartoon and TV chameleon we see, they are specifically changing their colors to blend into a specific environment. And while this is a neat party trick and a logical survival instinct, this is actually not what's going on in most cases. But before I describe exactly why chameleons actually change color, I want to describe exactly how they change color, because this process is amazing. You see, in the skin of a chameleon, it has what is known as pigment cells. Pigment cells aren't necessarily rare in the animal kingdom, and there are certain animals that can even control them, such as squids and cuttlefish. Those animals actually have small muscles that can expand or contract these pigment cells to change their color. However, that's not how the chameleon changes its colors. It has these pigment cells, but it can't control them. Now, interestingly, between these pigment cells, chameleons have separate cells that have darker melanin pigment, and these cells specifically can be controlled by the chameleon. And how this works is really quite astonishing. These melanin pigment cells basically expand or contract across the surface of the skin to either darken or lighten the skin of the chameleon. And this works completely separately from the default pigment cells that are already on the skin. Chameleons aren't the only animal that do this process either. There's a fish known as the tilapia fish that also has this same method of color changing. And you can see on this close-up video exactly how it works in real time, and it is so crazy. Seeing it side by side on a visual level and on a cellular level is so interesting. But we're still not done yet, because on top of the pigment cells that already exist and the melanin pigment cells that the chameleon can control, the chameleon also has tiny crystals in its skin that reflect light. And by seemingly some miracle, the chameleons can control exactly how far these crystals are from each other within its own skin. And the distance that these crystals are from each other directly determine the type of light that is reflected off the chameleon's skin. And now that we know the 3 primary tools in a chameleon's tool belt when it comes to changing color, how does this look in real time? Because I think most of us have a falsified idea of how this even looks. Here's a side-by-side video of a fake chameleon change and a real chameleon change. As you can see, the real is a little bit slower and a lot less dramatic, but still amazing nonetheless. But to go back to the original point of this section, if chameleons don't change their color for camouflage, why do they change their color at all? And sometimes fact is stranger than fiction, because chameleons are basically nature's mood ring. And scientists are pretty certain that in most cases, the only reason that chameleons are changing color are to better express their emotions to potential mates or to potential predators. And scientists even have their own theories on what each color means, which I'll go through right now. It's believed that when chameleons are extremely bright and colorful, they are at their most excited. And this could mean excited about a potential fight or excited about a potential mating session. I said mating session. When chameleons are typically darker, it's believed they are feeling more submissive or relaxed, for a less sensual word. But yeah, chameleons are cool, cute, cuddly. Some of them even have horns, but what you've been told about them is a lie. And it's believed that in the vast majority of cases, chameleons don't change color to blend in, they're changing color to better express themselves, which I think is an even cooler reality than what's portrayed in movies. But that's just my opinion. The subscriber scam. I think that one common fact most people believe is that if somebody's watching your video, they're probably subscribed to you. But I'm here to tell you that that fact is completely wrong. And I've got the facts to prove it. YouTube tells me that nearly 75% of people watching my videos are not even subscribed, which is a crazy statistic. So if you've been watching my videos and you enjoy them, feel free to hit the subscribe button. And if you need a reason to subscribe and you're not already, look at the subscribe button while I say, subscribe to Trust Me Bro. If that doesn't blow your mind, I don't know what will. But now let's get to our next serious section, the fortune cookie falsehood. Growing up, getting Chinese food was a special occasion, and it was truly one of my favorite special meals. And out of the entire seemingly endless spread that we would order from these Chinese food places, my favorite part of the meal was always the fortune cookie. Obviously a staple in Chinese cuisine, and a long-lasting tradition in Chinese culture, right? The fortune cookie, always served in Chinese restaurants, has to be Chinese. It would make no sense any other way, right? And while I agree with that hypothesis, I'm sorry to tell you, but that is not the truth. The fortune cookies that you and I get in modern day Chinese food have almost nothing to do with China whatsoever. And ironically, when the whole fortune cookie craze took over the Western world, companies tried selling fortune cookies in China, marketing them as an American treat, but they were taken off shelves because nobody was interested in them. And I genuinely don't think you can get more ironic than that. But if the paper and cookie tradition doesn't come from China and the cookie doesn't come from China, then who came up with these crazy cookies and why do they sell them at Chinese food spots? Well, I'm gonna answer both of those questions. But to be totally transparent, there is no definitive historical source of Chinese fortune cookies. All we have is some more modern accounts and some historical speculation, with the most proven and accepted theory being that Chinese fortune cookies actually originate in Japan. One of the only historical records of modern-day Chinese fortune cookies exist in illustrations from 19th century Japan. And these illustrations show a treat known as Sujiura senbei. But these illustrations aren't just a relic from the past, because to this day, you can buy this treat handmade on the streets of Kyoto. And how they make it is the following. Bakers will use iron molds, will grill the dough to a medium firm consistency, and then they will fold this dough into something they call small waffles. And it's during this folding process where they will insert a piece of paper with the fortune and give it its classic curved shape. But admittedly, this Japanese version and the Western version you and I are likely used to eating are not the same. With Sujiura senbei, for example, they are larger, darker, and savory. Whereas in the American version, they are sweeter, smaller, and lighter in texture because they are using butter instead of miso in the baking process. But while that is interesting and insightful, it still doesn't answer the question, how did this get into Chinese restaurants in America? And well, the answer is immigration and adaptability. During the 1910s, a lot of Japanese immigrants were landing in California. And with them, they brought their culture, specifically Sujiura senbei. And while that logically explains why these fortune cookies are in America, why are they in Chinese restaurants? And while this isn't definitively proven, the most commonly accepted answer as of now is a result of Asian fusion food restaurants and America's early on disdain for Japanese food. And what I mean by this is, in the 1910s, a lot of Japanese immigrants were struggling to open authentic Japanese restaurants, specifically because Americans were not too fond of eating raw fish. And because of this, these Japanese entrepreneurs decided that their best next steps were to create Chinese food restaurants, tailoring the dishes to the American palate, specifically giving a sweet treat at the end of a meal. Hence why the American fortune cookie is sweet and the Japanese version is, well, not. I saved this entry for the end of the video because technically it's not fact. There is a lot of working theories about all of the specific origins, and there is not one definitive historical account start to finish of the entire history of fortune cookies. However, what I've told you today is most commonly the accepted version of events. However, you could argue it's not fully known. And well, that's accurate. But I honestly just think the entire history of fortune cookies is just so interesting because it was a Japanese tradition that was brought to America, was extremely popular in America, was brought to China, and failed in China, which is, I don't know, ironic and worth mentioning. The richest people in human history. In the modern day, the position of world's richest person fluctuates pretty often, and these fluctuations are typically based off of stock price and other economic factors. And while it's interesting to talk about who the richest person in the modern day is, if you have an inquisitive mind, these thoughts may bring you to the question of who was the richest person in other time periods, and who was the richest person in human history. In this video, we're going to answer both of these questions and more, starting at the very beginning of human civilization, the Stone Age. It may serve as no surprise that because the Stone Age is, well, for the most part, prehistoric, we don't have any verifiable sources of wealthy individuals. That being said, that doesn't mean that we don't know what wealth looked like in the Stone Age, and for that reason, I wanted to at least quickly mention it. As I've mentioned in a few of our previous time period videos, wealth in the Stone Age was measured strictly in your ability to survive. And the things that granted your survival in the Stone Age were food, shelter, water, and community. And while those things may have no monetary value, in the Stone Age, being alive is a lot better than being dead with a pile of money. If you were rich in the Stone Age, you had a strong tribe around you. Your group consisted of strong, successful, ferocious hunters, attentive and expert gatherers, and passionate mothers taking care of the young. Humans in the Stone Age needed each other to survive, mainly because every aspect of life was work, and you can't do everything all by yourself. But in a tribe, tasks can be done by multiple people, allowing the group to survive. But outside of just tasks, the group also provided protection from natural predators, because in the Stone Age, humans weren't at the top of the food chain, and there was very much so natural predators that were wanting to eat you. But of course, community isn't the only thing that gave you wealth. Besides having this strong, tight-knit tribe, you also ensure that your tribe is located in a fruitful area of land. And what I mean by this is that hunting is bountiful. Animals consistently graze near your tribe, making hunting easy and consistent. But beyond just having a good location with consistent food and pelts, it's important that you have access to water, which is why you and your very wealthy tribe also have a perfectly clean stream going right beside your tribe's location. This stream provides your tribe not only with water, but also fish and transportation. But even with all of these Stone Age luxuries, there is still one more way that your tribe could have more wealth, and that is by having the best shelter possible. And in the Stone Age, one of the best options was a natural formation, typically a cave that provided shelter from storms and hot weather, consistent moderate temperatures, and once again, protection from natural predators. And while the bar may seem relatively low for the Stone Age, everything I just described was literally a dream come true. And if you happen to have all of these in your life, you were by far the wealthiest person to live. And by wealthiest, I just mean you were alive, because poverty in the Stone Age was literally just death. So even though our caveman ancestors didn't have much, and we can't verify who was the richest person at the time, it's at least interesting to understand what made a wealthy life during this time period, and it's also a good reminder that life is a blessing. The Bronze Age. No, not LeBron James, the Bronze Age, the time period that comes after the Stone Age. And luckily for us, we have verifiable evidence of who the richest person was during this time period. Wealth in the Bronze Age already looks worlds different than it did in the Stone Age. And that's because during the Bronze Age, human societal development really hit an exponential curve. And while the Stone Age literally went on for millions of years and only really yielded rudimentary structures and stone tools, the Bronze Age is where we really see society develop into small villages and also forging with metals. Most notably in this time period, bronze. With the development of society, culture, and tools, we now have a new definition of wealth. And fortunately, we also have documented history. However, I am using that term lightly because although we do have some texts referring to the reign and wealth of King Solomon, many of them came many years after his lifetime. So take some of these testimonies with a grain of salt. The year is 970 BC, and the kingdom of Israel is now under new management. King Solomon was the successor to his father, King David. It's estimated that King Solomon's rule ran from 970 BC to 931 BC. An impressive 39 years. And keep in mind, during this time period, even living to see 39 was an accomplishment. But longevity is not the point of this video, and what's even more impressive than his reign was his wealth. It's recorded that under the reign of King Solomon, his kingdom actually earned its highest splendor and wealth of all time, with record revenues reaching 666 talents of gold in a single year, which is an ironic number, but that equates to over 18,125 kilograms of gold earned in a single year. Keep in mind, the reason we're talking in precious metal volumes and not, well, dollar values is because during this time, money didn't even exist. Not even any form of coinage. Precious metals were truly the only storer of value, meaning that gold was truly the gold standard. And for that reason, King Solomon got a lot of it. And how he got this gold may not be so much of a shock. As the king of a nation, Solomon's wealth primarily came through tax revenue. But on top of this massive tax revenue, he also earned money through trade alliances and also control over important trade routes that linked Africa, Asia, and Europe together. But like any good business mogul, he didn't end there. Solomon was also involved in mining, agriculture, and also building projects funded by the kingdom's resources itself, meaning that not only did he have a massive personal net worth, but he also had, well, basically infinite money at his expense through the wealth of the nation that he managed. And because of the prosperity that Solomon's kingdom saw during his long reign, it's estimated that King Solomon's net worth would be valued at anywhere from $2 to $3 trillion, which is insane. And since it's kind of variable, let's just average it at 2.5 trillion. Now, like I mentioned earlier, almost all of the information available about Solomon came from the Bible, which isn't an issue until you realize that Solomon lived and died hundreds of years before the Bible took place, essentially. So once again, for that reason, take this one with a grain of salt, but it's definitely an interesting first entry. And while we're on the topic of the Bible and interesting, not only did the Bible mention how wealthy King Solomon was, but they also mentioned how, well, promiscuous he was. And it's literally stated in the Bible that King Solomon had over 700 wives, and because that wasn't enough, he also had an additional 300 concubines, meaning that this dude literally not only had trillions of dollars, but also had 1,000 girls in his roster. The Iron Age. Interestingly, the Iron Age is not much different than the Bronze Age, and the brief period transitioning from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age was actually a pretty tumultuous time. And while that's kind of beyond the scope of this video, society essentially took 2 steps forward in the Bronze Age, and then 1 step back, and then 2 steps forward again into the Iron Age. And while once humanity sort of stabilized again within the Iron Age, it didn't look too different from the Bronze Age besides one key difference: the main metal at play, obviously being iron. But beyond the introduction of iron, we also see refinements and growth within the civilizations that were formed in the Bronze Age, or at least the ones that survived it. Consider that subtle foreshadowing. Now, once again, one of the richest people to ever exist, and most likely one of the richest people in all of the Iron Age, was a man known as King Croesus. And Croesus was the king of Lydia, a wealthy kingdom that existed in modern-day Turkey. Croesus had a relatively short reign, only reigning from 560 BC to 546 BC, roughly 14 years. But during this time, Croesus became an icon of wealth. And he was so rich, in fact, that the phrase, "as rich as Croesus," actually not only gained steam during his reign, but also existed for millennia after his death. But the story of Croesus and Lydia isn't all sunshine and rainbows, because although he did have immense wealth, his reign and life did eventually end up being cut short. But before we describe that, how exactly did he earn all this wealth? As a king, it may come as no surprise that Croesus' wealth was primarily earned through taxation, trade routes, and natural resources within the Kingdom of Lydia. Interestingly, in the Kingdom of Lydia, there was literally a river that was full of something known as electrum, which was essentially a naturally occurring alloy of silver and gold, which is pretty fortunate. But not only was Croesus known for being rich, but he also changed money forever. He actually started minting some of the world's first coins ever, standardizing the world's first gold and silver coins. And he did this so he could A, centralize his wealth, and B, strengthen the economy of his entire kingdom. And his idea of forming precious metal coins took off and spread across, eventually, the entire world. But as I mentioned, the story of Croesus is one of large wealth, but also one of large hubris. And it's claimed in ancient texts that it was the hubris of Croesus that led to his and his kingdom's eventual downfall. During Croesus' peak, the Kingdom of Lydia was rich, expanding, and even had alliances with Greek city-states. And Croesus himself was synonymous with wealth and power. And it's believed that because of all of this success and power, Croesus got a bit too confident, and this confidence caused him to challenge Cyrus the Great of Persia, Persia being another opposing empire at the time. Croesus felt confident that he could expand his empire and take on Persia, but first he made sure to contact an oracle, and it's written that this oracle that Croesus consulted prophesied that, quote, Croesus would destroy a great empire. And it's believed that Croesus interpreted this message as he had already won the war, so he could begin it and win with ease. Although the opposite was true, and the empire that Croesus would destroy was actually his own. And in 546 BC, Lydia fell to Persia, and it's believed that Croesus was either executed or spared and turned into an advisor for Cyrus. At the peak of his net worth, it's estimated that Croesus had roughly a net worth of $500 billion. Which, I mean, compared to the previous trillionaire, doesn't sound that much, but this net worth is still insanely impressive. And remember, like King Solomon, this wealth was not stored in cash, stocks, crypto. This money was in physical gold and silver. And dude had so much money and so much time that he literally decided to create coinage. I bet King Solomon would have created coinage too if he wasn't messing around with 1,000 women. The Classical Era. The Classical Era is where things begin to get really interesting because history is getting more and more documented and wealth is becoming more and more, well, common. That being said, when I had to choose one rich person to represent the Classical Era, the option was obvious, and it started with me thinking about one of the most iconic empires that existed during the Classical Era, that being the Roman Empire. And when you think of Roman Empire, who do you think of? Julius Caesar wouldn't have been a wrong answer. But believe it or not, Julius Caesar wasn't actually the richest Roman. However, who is regarded as one of the richest, if not the richest Roman, was his adopted son, Augustus Caesar. And Augustus Caesar was getting that bag. Augustus Caesar was born in 63 BC. And after winning probably the biggest lottery in all of human history, he was adopted by Julius Caesar, the infamous dictator of Rome at the time. Augustus was brought up surrounded by wealth, power, influence, and strategy, and truly learned the ropes from one of the most iconic people to ever live. That being said, when Julius Caesar was assassinated, there was a massive power vacuum, and Augustus had some major shoes to fill. However, he did exactly that. And not only did he rise to power through political skill, but he also formed strategic alliances and had numerous military victories under his belt. And because of this, at the relatively young age of only 36, Augustus Caesar actually officially formed the Roman Empire. If you're a fan of the channel, then you know that we've talked about the Roman Empire at length through our almost 100 videos. And ironically, my second video ever was actually a video about why the Roman Empire fell. And while that's outside the scope of the video, I thought I would mention it, because the Roman Empire has way more lore than I can summarize right now. Let's focus back in on Augustus. Following suit with other kings and leaders we've discussed so far, Augustus accumulated his massive wealth through the major expansion of the Roman territory, massive conquests, and the spoils of war. On top of this, having one of the strongest empires allowed him to have a steady stream of taxation, provincial revenues, and even tributes from conquered land. And conquer land he did. Augustus' fortune was tied to the control of land across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, which obviously just was the Roman Empire, but it's crazy to think the sheer scale of this entire place that he controlled. And interestingly, historians estimate that in today's money, the net worth of Augustus would be in the trillions of dollars, likely in the 3 to 4 trillion range. But this is largely because as the emperor of the Roman Empire, he essentially controlled and owned everything within it. Like, just imagine you're working at an Amazon warehouse and Jeff Bezos walks in and just starts taking stuff off the shelves. I mean, nobody's gonna stop him, and technically it's his, but at the same time, it's also the company's, and the lines really start to get blurred. Regardless, Augustus Caesar had an insane career, both politically and economically. And for that reason, he's not only remembered as the founder of the Roman Empire, the son of Julius Caesar, but also as one of the richest men to ever live, with a net worth of, let's say, $3 trillion. The medieval era. History is really heating up with the medieval era, and we are once again getting more and more interesting entries to this list and more data to verify some of these claims. That being said, we are still in the realm of estimation. Although in the medieval era, we have some very interesting estimates to discuss. And I want to start our medieval journey not in medieval Europe, but actually in the steppes of Mongolia. In the year 1162, a young boy named Temujin was born, and little did his family know, Temujin would become one of the most famous and prolific people to ever live. And while this boy was named Temujin, you likely know him better as Genghis Khan, the same Genghis Khan that founded the Mongol Empire, which was the largest contiguous land empire in all of human history. And the wealth of Genghis Khan is actually quite different from the others we've discussed so far, and the others that we're going to discuss as well. Quite frankly, being the founder and ruler of one of the largest empires to ever exist, there is a very likely chance that Genghis Khan could have been the richest person in all of human history. However, there's a very important asterisk on that point. Genghis Khan was not one for personal wealth. And while the empire he was the sole heir to was extremely prosperous and rich in both land, resources, livestock, food, and army, Genghis himself did not store much value. He rather decided to invest back into the army to continue the expansion of the Mongolian Empire, which is likely a major contributing factor why the Mongolian Empire was so unstoppable for so long. Genghis ate, slept, lived, and dressed like a majority of his army. And while the actions done by Genghis Khan are, for the most part, deplorable, and the majority of his entire empire was funded by the pillaging and destruction of any other civilization they could, find essentially, it is still somewhat noble that Genghis decided to remain close to his modest roots and invest the wealth that his empire brought him back into his empire to further expand it. And while estimates for Genghis Khan's net worth range from anywhere from a few trillion to over 100 trillion, I would say that Genghis Khan's net worth is almost negligible considering how he viewed money. But because we need a number on this list, let's just call it 100 trillion in access, but maybe 100 billion in execution. Money he actually spent on his own personal lifestyle. And honestly, I think even that's a bit overinflated. The Mongolian people were extremely nomadic, meaning that storing wealth was not necessarily a convenient thing to do. And unless you're Steve from Minecraft, you probably can't store $100 trillion worth of gold in your back pocket. Since Genghis Khan was relatively a modest individual, even though he he was likely one of the most powerful people to ever live, I wanted to add a secondary entry for the medieval era, someone you'll likely recognize if you're familiar with ancient, wealthy people. This next individual is a man known as Mansa Musa. And Mansa Musa, in many regards, is considered to be the most wealthy person to ever exist ever. Full stop. And while there's definitely an argument to back up that claim, we'll discuss how accurate that is at the end of the video. Mansa Musa ruled the Mali Empire from roughly 1312 AD to 1337 AD. And under the power of Mansa Musa, Mali was able to reach its peak power, influence, and wealth, controlling almost every key trade route across West Africa. But more notably, Musa's wealth came from the control of trade of salt and gold, which were extremely prevalent in West Africa at the time. But he didn't just profit off the trade of salt and gold. He also profited off the trade of ivory, slaves, spices, and other goods. Or should I say bads, because I don't think calling slaves goods is, well, good. He profited off goods and bads, okay? Regardless, Musa's net worth was immense, and it only grew when he took his legendary pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324. It was this pilgrimage that not only grew his net worth, but also increased his international fame. Musa traveled with a massive 60,000 person entourage, and he did so because he needed many people to carry all of the gold that he was earning and traveling with. And because he was traveling with so much gold, he would actually just give it away at different cities he was stopping in. And because of this, in cities like Cairo in Egypt, the gold that Musa was just giving away for free actually disrupted local economies. But yeah, Musa was literally kitted out in full gold armor, all gold tools, had an army of 60,000 people in all gold armor, an additional 60,000 camels with all gold armor, an inventory full of gold blocks. This guy made Mr. T's neck look naked, but at least he was generous. So generous, in fact, that he literally caused inflation. But here's where things get interesting. While every number we've discussed is an estimate, the estimate for Mansa Musa is relatively modest, with a net worth believed to be roughly around $400 billion, which is still massive and more money than the richest person in 2025 has. Although it's nowhere near the trillions we've discussed before. And after doing some research, I almost feel like Mansa Musa is known as the richest person to ever live simply because he was talked about so much in ancient texts, because this guy was just a G. If you saw a dude in all gold with 60,000 other gold people just giving out gold, I would probably believe that was the richest guy ever too. But that's not to discredit his legacy. The early modern era. Once again, there's so many good entries for this time period, we're doing a double feature. And we're starting with a man named Jacob Fugger. And Jacob Fugger is a real Fugger indeed. And that's because this man got so rich that he actually had more power over the kings in Europe. And that is saying something. Jacob Fugger was born into a wealthy family and started his career in the textile industry that his family was deeply invested in. Although it didn't take time for Jacob to realize that there was higher leverage opportunities out there. And he shifted his focus from being a merchant to being a bank for merchants. And with that, he made a massive fortune. And with that fortune, he got into some very interesting situations, specifically funding politicians to have power in parliament, and also by expanding his mining operation to create essentially a monopoly over the copper market in Europe. Jacob Fugger had so much money that he was literally known as Jacob Fugger the Rich. But he wasn't only known as a businessman. Like I mentioned, his career in politics made him known as a kingmaker, because he was giving out massive loans to Maximilian I and Charles V, both of which who ended up becoming massively powerful people within Europe. But Fugger wasn't only funding kings, he literally financed the creation of the Vatican. And to bankroll the construction of the Vatican, he actually started minting his own coins known as papal coins. And it was actually with Fugger's involvement with the Vatican that led to the eventual sale of indulgences, which was literally a ticket to heaven, which eventually sparked the entire Protestant Reformation. Regardless, Jacob Fugger was a very rich man. From textiles to mining to banker, Fugger did it all. And while he didn't do it all ethically, he did it. And it's estimated that his personal net worth was roughly 2% of Europe's GDP at the time, which would equate to roughly $400 billion in today's money. And interestingly, Jacob Fugger's net worth is one of the most provable net worths we've discussed so far, considering there are many records to validate these claims that are publicly available and, well, still exist. So even though 400 billion doesn't sound super impressive at this point in time, the power that he held as a non-royal was insane. And his net worth is likely one of the most accurate and non-inflated we've discussed so far. But like I mentioned, we got a double feature. So let's get that Fugger out of the way and discuss Akbar the Great. Akbar the Great was the third emperor of the Mughal Empire in India, and he ruled this empire from 1556 until his death in 1605. Interestingly, Akbar gained access to the throne at only 13 years old, when his father tragically died. And while giving a 13-year-old reign over an entire empire sounds like a horrible idea and has been proven to be multiple times throughout history, for Akbar, it actually worked out. It's almost like being a child actor. In most cases, it works out horribly, but sometimes it actually kind of does work out. His reign is remembered for vast land expansion, the flourishing of Indian culture, and strong central governance, which was largely missing at the time. And it was these primary contributing factors that made the Mughal Empire one of the wealthiest and most powerful states in the early modern era. The wealth that Akbar generated for the Mughal Empire was actually primarily driven by agriculture, as the lands of northern India were extremely fertile. But of course, in addition to this agriculture, he also made most of his money from taxation, both taxing those crops and other goods. On top of agriculture and taxation, once again, control of trade routes was a steady stream of income that allowed the Mughal Empire to grow and flourish. And due to this political success and economic growth, he ended up making the empire extremely rich, like 25% of the entire world's GDP rich, which equates to roughly $30 trillion in today's money. And unlike Genghis Khan, Akbar knew how to spend some money. He was known for his opulence, and so were his courtrooms and official government buildings. I wanted to add these two examples specifically for the early modern era because the examples are so vastly different, both in how they started their lives, acquired their wealth, and obviously the shocking difference in net worth between these two individuals. But keep in mind, for Akbar specifically, this 25% of global GDP is the wealth of the empire he controlled, not his personal wealth. And while that line was relatively blurred, even if we say he conservatively only paid himself 10% of that, we can estimate that his personal net worth was roughly around 3 trillion, although he had access to up to 30 trillion. So I'll let you be the judge of that. The modern era. Ladies and gentlemen, we have finally made it to the time period that we are currently existing in. With that being said, the modern era is considered to be from 1800 to today, meaning that we have a lot of ground to cover and many notable and documented individuals to discuss. So for that reason, I'm going to make this last time period a bit of a speed round. I want to first discuss Cornelius Vanderbilt, a man who lived from 1794 to 1877, and he was a man who was known as the first American business tycoon. And that he was. Vanderbilt built his fortune primarily through shipping routes and railroads, and he started his career as a ferry operator in the New York City harbor, where he was first exposed to commercial transportation, which later inspired him to start his focus on railroads and expansion across all of America. That being said, Vanderbilt wasn't necessarily a good guy, and he actually earned the name of robber baron as well, because he would typically use monopolistic strategies and market manipulation in his favor to buy railroads as cheaply as possible and extract the most value out of them. Regardless, Vanderbilt is known as one of the men that built America as we know it today, and the railroad systems that he established connecting U.S. cities and boosting American trade are still marveled at to this very day. At the time of his death, Vanderbilt's net worth was roughly $3 billion in today's money. And interestingly, when he died, he was worth more than the US Treasury. So even though $3 billion sounds puny in the video, within context, that number is massive. Cornelius died in 1877, and interestingly, in 1973, only 100 years later, it was found out that during a family reunion, there was not one single millionaire left in the family. That's right, the Vanderbilt family literally blew billions of dollars in less than 100 years through financial mismanagement and I'm sure other reasons. And besides Cornelius, another major player during the beginning of the modern era was a man known as John D. Rockefeller. And Rockefeller, he did. Rockefeller was one of the most prolific industrialists in American history, and he was the founder of the Standard Oil Company during the Industrial Revolution, a time when oil was an emerging market. And he was not only capitalizing on it, he was monopolizing on it. I think it's also important to note that during this time, business was nowhere near what it's like today. Like if you're complaining about modern day capitalism, then you should have seen 1800s capitalism. There was absolutely no regard for the environment, other business people, families, children, nothing. The Industrial Revolution was full of factories that had pregnant women and children working all day, with reckless disposal of industrial waste, and the most strong-arm, backstabby business tactics you've literally ever heard of. 1800s Industrial Revolution business was not for the faint of heart. And fortunately for Rockefeller, this was a game he was willing to play. When Rockefeller launched Standard Oil in 1870, he grew the company rapidly by essentially undercutting all of his competition. And then with the revenue he gained through undercutting this competition, he then bought out all of his competitors. And only 2 years after starting Standard Oil in 1872, there was a small few-month streak where Rockefeller bought 22 of the 26 oil refineries in Cleveland alone. And this purchasing streak was so impactful on Cleveland that it was literally known as the Cleveland Massacre. But Rockefeller didn't just undercut and buy every oil refinery he could. He also made sure to integrate vertically, controlling everything from the production, transportation, and sales of any oil product. And during the late 1870s, Standard Oil was literally refining over 90% of America's oil. And eventually, people were fed up with it. And I think in some cases, Rockefeller was truly seen as the first real example of true corporate greed, a symbol and theme that would continue until, well, today. Rockefeller's company, Standard Oil, got so big, in fact, that in 1911, the Supreme Court forced him to break up his company into 34 smaller companies, which he did, and ironically, this division only led to an increase of net worth for Rockefeller. Rockefeller was not a good guy, but there are a lot of things we use every single day that have been influenced from his work, and it was people like him that built the society we live in today, whether you like it or not. Rockefeller's net worth was estimated to be equivalent to almost 2% of all of the US's GDP, and he's also considered to be the world's first billionaire. And while there's definitely other honorable mentions from the beginning part of the modern era, like the Rothschilds and Henry Ford, I want to fast forward to the modern day to discuss some of the richest people in 2025, and also reflect on all of the rich people we've discussed and determine who is the richest of all. As of today, the world's richest man is largely believed to be Elon Musk. But besides Elon Musk, some other notable billionaires include Jeffrey Bezos, Bill Gates, and Bernard Arnault. And while I think most of us understand who these people are and how they made their money, I think it's important to reflect on how their net worths differ from people in the past. For example, you don't see Elon Musk storing all of his net worth in gold or taking a 60,000 person pilgrimage across Africa with gold armor on. A majority of his wealth is in shares, stocks, and is largely based off of the evaluation of the companies that he owns. Now, if we stack up Elon Musk's net worth of roughly $382 billion at the time of recording this video, he actually ranks relatively low in the context of this list. And for that reason, this video is about to get rather subjective, because to answer the question of who's the richest person in human history, there's a few different answers, at least in my opinion. If you want to base the ranking of history's richest person based off the numerical value, which, I mean, is logical, then I would say that honestly Genghis Khan has an extremely strong case for richest person ever. Although, if you want to base it off popular vote, there is a lot of people, for good reason, that believe that Mansa Musa was the richest person to ever walk this earth. However, if you're asking me who the richest person in all of human history is, genuinely, I would say that there has to be more factors beyond just wealth we consider. Because while Genghis Khan may have potentially had the most access to wealth, he personally wasn't extremely wealthy and also lived a lifestyle I have absolutely no interest in. And to be frank, I really don't have much interest in living any time before, I guess, 1990. The reason being, maybe I'm just spoiled, but I enjoy modern luxuries of today. And I would argue that somebody with a minimum wage job in America today lives a much better life than a king did in medieval times. Specifically because the technology, medicine, entertainment, and modern luxuries far outweigh any amount of gold, at least in my opinion. And I guess you have to ask yourself, do you want to be in a castle with a jester and a pile of unlimited gold? Or do you want a toilet that flushes, air conditioning, and access to YouTube to watch Trust Me Bro? That's the question. I'll let you decide in the comments. But if you're asking me who I think the richest person in all of human history is, I would definitely argue that Elon Musk takes the cake. Simply because his net worth is massive, he's the most prosperous man in the most prosperous era of human history, and he's also able to enjoy his money during the best time to ever live in human history, which is today, in my opinion. The craziest scams in every time period. The Stone Age. Admittedly, this section is going to be rather short, for a couple of reasons. Primarily being that the Stone Age is literally prehistoric, meaning that everything I'm about to discuss is essentially speculative. Also, because most of human life in the Stone Age was extremely simple, meaning that at this point, human life wasn't even able to comprehend the possibility of deception. If you had something that another human wanted, there was two options. Either they kill you to get the thing, or they die trying to kill you to get that thing. That was realistically the extent of scams in the Stone Age. Keep in mind, the Stone Age literally extends over 3.4 million years worth of history. The Stone Age contains 99.3% of all recorded human history, dating back around 300,000 years ago when Homo sapiens first appeared. So with that being said, what are some scams that could have possibly existed in the Stone Age? And let me present you a few interesting opportunities. Scam number one, the made you look scam. Here's how the scam goes. You are a caveman, and your enemy, also a caveman, comes to ask you a question. You decide you've had enough of his antics and point in the direction that's behind him. This caveman turns around, you pull out your trusty club and hit him in the head. Now, your enemy is dead, and you have just successfully committed a Stone Age scam. In modern terms, that's not much of a scam at all. When it comes to prehistoric humans, things were simple. Just think about that one episode of SpongeBob that took place in the prehistoric times. That's kind of what we're working with here. But besides the petty theft and petty murder of the Stone Age, I believe one of the biggest scams out of the Stone Age was actually the existence of the Stone Age itself. You see, the Stone Age primarily is defined by its use of stone tools, specifically near the very end of the Stone Age. And this is because humans using stone tools signifies the evolution of human creativity, human engineering, human development. Now, you may be thinking, well, of course, we need this human development. This isn't a scam at all. This is beautiful. This is progress. And what I would say to you is, not really. Because look where it's gotten us. As humans, we used to sleep outside under the stars, do whatever we wanted all day, go to the bathroom anywhere. We essentially lived like animals, and it was great. Just look how good your dog or cat has it right now. We used to live like them, but now we wake up to an alarm, we go to a job, we commute, we have anxiety, we have bills. Our bills even have bills at this point. So although the scam may have not taken place in the Stone Age, it definitely started in the Stone Age. And potentially one of the biggest scams of the Stone Age was that one meddling, weaselly little caveman that decided to combine a stick with a rock. And maybe if he was the one who got clubbed, we would still be living that sweet animalistic lifestyle. This first section was a bit silly, but I didn't want to leave this Stone Age out of a video about every time period. But with that being said, as we now transition into recorded history, the scams are going to be historically documented and much more serious. But this is a Trust Me Bro video, so don't expect a documentary. The Bronze Age. No, not LeBron James. The Bronze Age. Not LeBron's Age. The Bronze Age. Yes, that was corny, and yes, we're keeping it in. We are now in the Bronze Age, the beginning of recorded scams. And the scam I'm going to be speaking about from the Bronze Age involves metal fraud, and also includes the earliest ever recorded customer complaint. Let me explain. The year is circa 1750 BC, right near the end of the Bronze Age. And there is a famous copper merchant named Ea Nasser. Ea Nasser, unsurprisingly, would buy and sell metals, specifically copper. And this merchant was no stranger to customer complaints, with one of the most famous examples coming from a customer named Nani. Nani's specific issue with Ea Nasser was that Ea Nasser was selling bad quality or low quality copper, and that was a big issue for Nani. Unlike the Stone Age, I'm not just making this up. This transaction and subsequent complaint is recorded in commercial tablets. These tablets were actually unearthed with a group of other tablets recording transactions and complaints about the copper quality. And these were all found in a home that was believed to at one point been owned by Ea Nasser, which is by itself just a really cool piece of history. Ea Nasser was a well-known copper merchant in his city and was even a member of an established and, relatively speaking, respected copper guild, meaning that he wasn't just any Joe Schmo. However, these credentials definitely didn't help him with his business dealings, because although he may have been surrounded by proper, integral copper merchants, Ea Nasser was likely nothing of the sort. And this is proven by the famous tablet sent to Ea Nasser from Nani, which has actually been translated, and I'm about to read exactly what Nani said to Ea Nasser, and I'll let you decide whether or not Ea Nasser was a scammer. The tablet reads as follows. When you came, you said to me as follows. I will give Gimmelson fine quality copper ingots. You left, but then you did not do what you promised. You put ingots which were not good before my messenger and said, if you want to take them, take them. If you do not want to take them, go away. Who do you take me for, that you treat someone like me with such contempt? I have sent as messengers gentlemen like ourselves to collect the bag with my money, but you have treated me with contempt by sending them back empty-handed several times. And that through enemy territory. Is there anyone among the merchants who trade with Dilmun who has treated me in this way? You alone treat my messenger with contempt. On account of that one trifling mina of silver which I owe you, you feel free to speak in such a way. While I have given to the palace on your behalf 1,080 pounds of copper, and Shubi Abum has likewise given 1,080 pounds of copper, apart from what we had both had written on a sealed tablet to be kept in the temple of Shamash. How have you treated me for that copper? You have withheld my money bag from me in enemy territory. It is now up to you to restore my money to me in full. Take cognizance that from now on I will not accept here any copper from you that is not of fine quality. I shall from now on select and take the ingots individually in my own yard, and I shall exercise against you my right of rejection because you have treated me with contempt. That was long, but I wanted to give you the exact full quote because I think it's extremely interesting, and I think that Nani is being rather patient and has more than enough reason to be upset. To summarize, Ea Nasser, at least to Nani, is selling low quality copper, and not only is he selling a low quality product, but he's promising a high quality product, and when questioned by the servants that are going to pick up the product, he is not nice at all. He's very combative within these transactions, and not only that, he's also refusing to give a full or even partial refund to Nani after his complaint, and Nani has sent multiple messengers to collect a refund. And what does Ea Nasser do? Turns him away empty-handed and sends him through enemy territory to risk the life of the messenger just to add insult to injury for Nani. I don't know about you, but if I was Nani, I would definitely be sending somebody else to Ea Nasser's door that wasn't a messenger looking for my money back. But even after all of this, Nani isn't even refusing to deal with Ea Nasser anymore. He's just saying that once he gets the copper from Ea Nasser, he's going to go through and verify the quality himself before he buys it, which is something he likely should have been doing, but I guess didn't feel like he had to be doing because he was buying from a merchant in the Copper Guild. But lesson learned on Nani's part, check your metal as you buy it. So yeah, this one tablet that was found thousands of years after it was created, went on to solidify Ian Nasser as one of the most notorious Bronze Age businessmen and scammers. The Iron Age. The Iron Age is a very interesting time period, and it represents a change of power, at least in the world of metals, as the Iron Age literally represents iron becoming the prominent metal that is being mined, forged, and fashioned into tools and ornaments and armor. And the reason that transition was made is kind of a long story, but the transition from Bronze Age to Iron Age was harsh, and humanity as a whole took a step backwards before it could take 2 steps forwards as it transitioned from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age. However, the Iron Age is not free from scams, and it itself has a very interesting laundry list of scams that took place, with the one that I'm going to focus on involving silver coinage, debasement, and hyperinflation. Admittedly, the scam I'm about to discuss kind of bleeds out of the Iron Age, but I had other scams I wanted to associate with other time periods, so although this specific scam doesn't take place in the Iron Age, it definitely has its roots in the Iron Age. So I'm going to allow that technicality to make this work, because trust me, we do have some crazy scams coming up. The Iron Age is when we truly see the rise of coinage being used. During the mid to late Iron Age, we see coins being minted and being transacted with, which during this time in history, circa 600 BC, is a relatively new methodology of transacting, because up until this point, all of commerce was conducted through trade, one good for another. There was no store of value. It was simply merchandise for merchandise, no currency of any sort, at least in the form of coinage. Prior to coinage, precious metals were definitely the currency of choice, but they weren't necessarily currency, just something of value to most people, and a good way to store value efficiently, as they were non-perishable and value dense for the most part. Now, even during this time in the late Iron Age, these coins that were being made weren't even used for transacting yet. They were primarily religious objects, typically used as badges or medals. But it didn't take too long for these people that were creating these interesting, valuable metals to create something that had trade value. Specifically with ancient Greek coinage being minted by the Ionian Greeks in the late 6th century, right at the ass crack of the Iron Age. And it is believed that these ancient Greek coins were the first coins ever to be used for transacting on a large-scale basis, and they were made primarily of small silver fractions. But this recent innovation of commerce spread like wildfire through the 5th and 6th century BC, and quickly became the standard, primarily being pioneered by the ancient Greeks and other empires of the time. But this in itself isn't the scam, it's simply the context for the scam that we are about to discuss. This context is important because it anchors us to the Iron Age, although what we're about to discuss happens slightly after the Iron Age, and involves actually the Roman Empire. During the Iron Age, ancient Rome is established, and during the end of the Iron Age, the Roman Republic is established. And during these times, the innovation with iron is giving Rome a lot of strength and a lot of military capability. And due to the rise of ancient Rome and then the Roman Republic, we find ourselves with the Roman Empire, which, like I mentioned, isn't in the Iron Age, but we're making it count. And it's with the Roman Empire that we find ourselves with our very next scam. The scam being coin debasement. And this one scam actually ended up being a contributing factor to the fall of the Roman Empire. By the time that the Roman Empire was established, coinage was in full effect and used effectively, and worked as follows. Early coinage would be made out of pure or near pure materials, typically gold, silver, and copper. These ingots would be purchased, minted, and then sold into circulation with a face value slightly above their metal value. This allowed the government to make a small profit on every coin that they minted, and also allowed the currency to keep a consistent value, as it had an intrinsic value of the metal it was made out of, while it also had a face value of only slightly above that, which everyone generally accepted. Coins typically varied in value from region to region, meaning that in simple modern terms, if you had a coin that had a face value of $2, but was, made out of $1.50's worth of silver, in your region, you can trade this for $2. But if you go to a different region where they have their own coinage, they're not going to accept your coinage at face value, but they'll take it at intrinsic value, meaning that your $2 coin in this new region is now worth $1.50. And this system actually incentivized local trade, as you are going to get the most bang for your buck. But the scam we are going to discuss is the debasement of coin that happened when the government wanted to inflate the number of coins that they could produce, and they tried to do so rather sneakily. There was 2 primary methods of debasement when they started to use this practice. When the government would mint these coins, they would either make them slightly lighter than they were supposed to be, meaning that they would mint a coin and then shave parts off of it to reclaim small scraps, or they would simply use a poor quality metal. This would save them money and make the coins that they're minting cheaper, while they would still be selling them for the same face value. giving the government extra funds. But these methods of debasement continued and began to progress and became more and more severe. What the Roman Empire began to do was start devaluing their coins by not making them a little lighter or using a lower quality material, but actually reducing the percentage of precious metals in the coins. Early coinage of the Roman Empire consisted of anywhere from 93 to 97% of the precious metal they were supposed to be. But it didn't take long for the government to reduce this number from 93% in 107 AD to 78.5% in 193 AD, and then to 35% in 254 AD, and then 20% in 257 AD, and then all the way down until 5% silver in 270 AD. The impact of this was obviously massive, as this massive influx of token supply and massive decline in intrinsic value of these tokens created hyperinflation. And runaway hyperinflation actually happened multiple times throughout the Roman Empire. As I mentioned before, most of this debasement would happen to fund military campaigns to try to get more land, more money, more power, and they likely justified this debasement by saying they were going to collect more wealth for the greater empire. Although what really happened was prices would rise, and the value of coins that everybody was collecting, holding, trading with was dropping significantly. And it wasn't unheard of for an army to go on a campaign, get paid their money, only to realize that once they go to spend their money, the big paycheck that they thought they had gotten is now only worth a few days' meals, which obviously put pressure between the government and the army, something that no government wants to have. I think it's important to note that in modern times, the creation of money and steady inflation is something we kind of just accept, and it's part of how our currency operates. However, at this time, each individual coin had an intrinsic value, and that was the backing of its value. And even if you paid for currency in your local region and took it to a different region, even if they did not accept your region's currency, they would still pay you what your precious metal was worth, meaning that your money could never go to nothing. I suppose to put it in a modern day context, imagine if the government just said, hey, actually it's cheaper to make $1 bills than it is to make $5 bills. So all new $1 bills are actually 5. And the government just wrote a 5 on a $1 bill. You can still see that it's a $1 bill, but you and everyone else is supposed to act like it's a $5 bill. That's going to create some suspiciousness. And even that, admittedly, is a bad analogy, because the currency that we use today all has the same intrinsic value of nothing, at least not in its physical form. With early coinage in the Iron Age, there was forgery, debasement, and fraud. But I wanted to cover the hyperinflation of the Roman Empire because I thought it was a great summary of what was brewing in the Iron Age at a major historical scale. And while the Roman Empire did not exist in the Iron Age, ancient Rome did. And I'm making this point abundantly clear to prevent any sort of misinformation. And truthfully, the hyperinflation of the Roman Empire was the best example of coin debasement I could find. So I decided to take a story out of the future and apply it to the Iron Age to make this section the best it could be. So yeah, Rome was formed in the Iron Age, coins were formed in the Iron Age, but likely the most famous example of coin debasement and hyperinflation happened a little after and involved the Roman government literally scamming its people by making the currency cheaper and worse while still maintaining the same face value. And well, it backfired on everybody. The Classical Era. Although we are now in the Classical Era, the scam that we're about to discuss is anything but classy and actually contains what is believed to be the first instance of insurance fraud, which is just great to hear that people have been committing insurance fraud for thousands of years. Perhaps insurance fraud is just in our DNA. In the Classical Era, there was a man in ancient Greece known as Hegestratos, and he was a little bit of a knucklehead. During roughly 5th century BCE, near the beginning of the Classical Era, maritime trade was booming. Hegestratos was a ship owner and was profiting from this maritime trade that was taken off. And because he had a big and beautiful and shiny ship, he decided that it would be wise to get insurance, which he did. And this insurance not only covered his cargo, but also his ship on any given sea voyage. How it would work is lenders would lend money to these seafarers using the ship and its loot as collateral. The lender would say, hey, your boat is worth 2 gold ingots and everything in it is worth 5 gold ingots. Great, I'll give you 7 gold ingots. If you come back from your journey of trade with 10 ingots worth of stuff, that's great. Give me 9 ingots. That means I make a 2 ingot profit and you make a 1 ingot profit. But if your ship sinks while you're on this voyage, you don't have to give me anything. That's essentially how the insurance existed, and this helped mitigate the risk for the seafarer and also gave these lenders the opportunity to make money with some risk, but obviously nobody was going to be incentivized to sink their own ship or not come back with loot. The whole point of the voyage was to make money, right? That's where Hegestratos comes in. Hegestratos realized that he didn't actually need to go on any adventures at all, and he didn't even need to fill up his boat with loot. What Hegestratos ended up deciding to do was he would fill his ship with things that looked valuable, and what he would typically do was fill crates with sand, cheap ornaments, with sometimes boxes of valuables on top, to make it appear that the whole ship was full of valuables, when in reality there was a layer of valuables on top of a lot of boxes of basically garbage. This would make the ship appear heavy and full, and also give creditors a good reason to give him a good insurance policy. Already, Hegestratos was scamming, because creditors would give Hegestratos an inflated value, essentially. If Hegestratos was able to convince creditors that his boat was worth at least 2 gold ingots, and the contents of his boat were extremely expensive dyes and spices and metals, maybe they would say that the contents of his boat were worth 10 gold ingots, when in reality it was only worth 2 gold ingots, when the rest was dirt and sand. That is obviously a scam. But now, sure, Hegestratos has a bunch of gold ingots, but he also has debt, and he's not going to go sail away and make money off of dirt. So what does he do instead? Well, he would go take this boat and deliberately sink it. Now, all of the money that the creditor had given him was his money, fair and straight, and he really was out nothing, and he could continue this plan over and over. And it wasn't long before Hegestratos' scam was exposed. And this kind of shocked the ancient Greek world, because during this time, there was integrity and respect for the law and understanding when it came to commerce. And such a fraud was not even necessarily thought of. But when this scam was exposed, it kind of exposed the vulnerability in these early financial contracts and how people could manipulate things in a way that may seem counterintuitive, but would ultimately be beneficial for the scammer. The case of Hegestratos is considered to be one of the biggest scams of the classical era. Not only because it was just so ballsy, but also because it was the first instance of insurance scam and kind of gave the entire insurance industry a huge shakeup and a wake-up call for how they had to protect themselves moving forward when they were crediting people who could potentially screw them over. So yeah, the classical era, I'm sure, had more scams than you could count, but I definitely think the case of Hegestratos is one of the most interesting and definitely one of the most defining of this time period, the medieval era. I don't know about you, but I feel like the medieval era is definitely one of the most interesting parts of history. You have castles, knights, kingdoms, wealth inequality, and a plethora of scams. What is there not to enjoy? It was honestly a bit tough to pick just one scam for the medieval era, but I'm happy with the one I chose, so let's get right into it. There's no doubt that in medieval times, the Christian religion was everything. And this is kind of proven by all of the art, architecture, writings, everything was the Christian religion. And with every fan base comes collectors. And while the Christian religion didn't necessarily have marketable plushies at the time, they definitely had a huge underground market for relics. And these relics were definitely odd, to say the least. Potentially the most famous Christian relic would be the Holy Grail, but it's definitely not the only relic that people were interested in getting their hands on, with some of the most popular and sought after ancient relics being the literal bones of saints. Like, let's say there was a famous saint who was very prolific and known in the church. Well, once they die, if you could get one of their bones, you could possess their magical powers. Like, literally, that was the mindset. Merchants and other saints and even individuals wanted these bones for a plethora of different reasons. Wealthy individuals would typically want to collect these relics to help make their own desires and dreams come true, as these Christian relics were believed to essentially cause miracles. And in that instance, if there was an object that could bless you, that could make all of your dreams come true, that could protect your family and defeat your enemies, is there really a price you wouldn't pay for them? But here's the thing. Not many people had this money at all. And what people resorted to was visiting churches that had these relics so that they could gain the power and benefit of them from a fraction of the price. And that's exactly why bishops and priests would collect these relics. Obviously, they would see the value of these blessed items that could provide miracles as something that they would want to have in their life and in their church, but they also noticed that any church with a relic was gaining more foot traffic, more donations, and became more or less of a landmark and a hotspot for pilgrimages. And this is where the business opportunity arose. Merchants, whether they believed in the power of these relics or not, if a merchant was able to get their hands on a relic at a decent price, they could sell it to almost anybody with money for an astonishing profit. Here's the issue. As the popularity and demand grew for relics, the supply didn't really. Which was great for investors because, supply and demand, but that also gave incentive for others. The only way that a relic could really even be brought into this underground market was by a crusader who would go and reclaim the relic from the Holy Land, or a merchant who would do business in the Holy Land, hopefully trying to get a relic or something close to a relic that they could buy cheap and sell for a massive profit back in Europe. But these two methods were slow and could not keep up with demand whatsoever, which is why some interesting individuals decided to help contribute to that supply chain issue. Here's the deal. Obviously, these relics have absolutely no certificate of authenticity or receipt or any sort of tracking on where they came from. It's essentially just word of mouth. So if you were a respected or authoritative or even just a charismatic figure, you could kind of pass off anything as a relic with enough convincing. And that's exactly the scam that we are going to discuss. Fake black market Christian relics. Some famous examples of this would be fake bones. For example, St. John the Baptist was a famous saint that people claimed to have relics of, and these relics were his bones. But once all of the bones that were claimed to be his were accounted for and organized, it was concluded that either St. John had 3 heads and 5 arms, or some people had some fake relics. 2 other famous and common fake relics were pieces of the Holy Shroud and splinters from the cross that Jesus was crucified on. Obviously, any part of either of these items would have extreme significance to history, and even the tiniest morsel of either of these items would be massively valuable. And for that reason, people decided to make their own. At the time, the only way that these relics could be verified is if they actually had provable miracle abilities. So if a church had a relic in it and somebody with a disability was healed, or a sick person was made healthy again, or a dying person was living longer, or a poor man came into money, if any of these happened after somebody encountered the relic would have been proved real. And the people who had experienced miracles from these relics would go and tell their friends and their family, essentially marketing the church that had this relic in-house. But even with that being said, who's to say if these people had experienced miracles from genuine or non-genuine items? It really kind of gets messy from there. Once the industry of fake relics began to become exposed, it was almost a running joke at the time that if they bought all of the splinters being sold from the cross, they would actually be able to build a warship out of all of the wood. If anybody tries to sell you a piece of wood telling you that it came from the cross that Jesus was crucified on, I would probably pass, or at least confirm it can do miracles before you buy it. The Renaissance era. If you've watched any of my time period videos, you would know that I've actually never covered the Renaissance era by itself, mostly because the time period itself is short and kind of similar to the era that took place before it. One of the most famous figures to come out of the Renaissance era was Michelangelo, likely most famous for his statue of David. But did you know that he got his start by scamming? Circa 1496, Michelangelo sculpted a marble sleeping Cupid. It was an extremely lifelike and beautiful sculpture that highlighted exactly how talented Michelangelo was even at an early age. But during the Renaissance era, art collectors weren't necessarily looking for modern art. They were looking for historic pieces, which typically meant ancient Roman or Greek statues, rather than new ones. So what Michelangelo did with this statue of the Cupid was he decided, instead of selling it for a cheaper price compared to the antiques, he decided to make his new statue an antique by intentionally wearing it down. It's not quite confirmed how he did it, but he made sure to make this sculpture look worn. And it obviously worked because he was actually able to sell it as a lost Roman antiquity. And not only was he able to sell it, but he sold it for a much higher price than he was initially looking for. The sculpture was actually sold to a cardinal, Raphael Riario, who initially was fooled, but eventually discovered the truth. When Cardinal Raphael discovered the truth and confronted Michelangelo, he wasn't upset with him, he was actually impressed, and he invited Michelangelo to Rome. And when Michelangelo came to Rome, he was given his first major opportunity in his career, and this was the actual opportunity that launched Michelangelo's career and made him the icon that he is today. This cardinal was able to understand the genius of the young Michelangelo, and was likely thinking that if he could point him in the right direction, he could create one of the best artists of all time. So yeah, as far as Renaissance scams are concerned, I think Michelangelo selling one of his original artworks as an antiquity summarizes this era perfectly. And it's kind of ironic to think that Michelangelo literally had to make his art something else to try and sell it. Regardless, Michelangelo was dope. But when he was starting out, he was definitely clever when it came to selling his art. The early modern era. We've covered a lot of scams in this video so far, but one scam we haven't covered is the fake king scam. Obviously, because you can't fake being a king, right? There's no way you can just tell people that, hey, actually, I'm the king. Not only are people not going to believe you, but you're likely going to be killed. And that's the truth unless your name was Perkin Warbeck, who in the 1490s not only claimed to be a king, but also became a serious threat for the reigning king at the time. And he gained significant backing and support. But before we get to how this entire scam ends, let me tell you how it starts. Perkin Warbeck claimed to be the younger of the 2 princes in the tower, which, if you're unfamiliar, the princes in the tower refers to a mysterious disappearance of 2 young royals. King Edward V of England and his younger brother, Prince Richard of Shrewsbury, Duke of York. They were both heirs to the throne of King Edward IV of England, but at the ages of 12 and 9, they were locked away in the Tower of London by their uncle, and they were never seen again. This obviously caused a lot of issues within the kingdom, but for Perkin Warbeck, this created an opportunity. Before pretending to be a king, Warbeck was born into a rich merchant-class family and traveled around and spent time in Ireland selling silks before him and his friend came up with the plan to impersonate the younger of the two brothers who disappeared, as this missing person was not only not found, but was an heir to a throne, meaning that if this person was found, they had legitimate claim to the kingdom, which is definitely a title worth fighting for. Warbeck didn't just necessarily hit the streets telling everybody, hey, by the way, I'm the prince and I'm back and I'm totally good. He was very strategic in who he decided to lay his claim to, which was high-ranking government officials. He gained his first piece of notable support from King Charles VIII of France. And this is a major piece of backing to have behind you, because if the king of another country recognizes and supports you as the lost heir to a throne, you have some serious credibility to your claim. But this didn't last long, as King Henry VII, the current king, had formed an alliance with the King of France. There was no longer support from the King of France to be helping Perkin Warbeck, so we kind of had to start from scratch once again. So the next place that Perkin Warbeck went for support is actually insane, because he went to the actual sister of the lost princes in the tower, and not only did he go there to claim that he was her long-lost brother, but she bought it up. She was like, oh yeah, you are totally my long-lost brother. And now this support was likely even more valuable than the initial support, because no sibling is going to accept a faker as their long-lost sibling, right? Regardless of their beliefs or intentions, this duchess appeared to believe Perkin Warbeck, and with this support, Perkin continued his conquest to claim that he was the long-lost king. The following year, in 1493, he attended the funeral of Maximilian's father, Frederick III, where he was actually recognized as King Richard IV of England at the funeral. And it only took 2 more years in 1495 for support for Warbeck to have the throne bubbling within England. Warbeck was actually able to gather an army of 150 people and attempted a landing in Kent, where Warbeck and his small army were met with locals who were loyal to their actual king, Henry VII, and the Battle of Deal ensued. Most of this army died, and Warbeck retreated back to Ireland. But even in Ireland, he was facing issues and once again fled to Scotland. While in Scotland, Perkin was actually able to set up an arranged marriage with one of the relatives of the king, known as Lady Catherine Gordon. And now, after officially becoming royalty in some regard, the Scottish palace was open to Warbeck to gather his army and begin to plan another attack on England. The attack that Perkin Warbeck and the Scottish king had planned ended up failing before it even started. And what I mean by that is, before the battle even started, they essentially retreated. But the following year, the Scottish king and Warbeck tried again, but this time their landing was different. In 1497, support for the current king of England was low, primarily to new taxes and rising legislation. And for this reason, and because more time had passed for people to sympathize with Perkin, who was pretending to be the lost king, there was slightly more popularity for him on English soil. So this landing was met with some support. He actually was able to raise a rebellion and was declared King Richard IV, the person he was claiming to be this entire time. And at this point, it may have seemed that his plan was successful, and his next plan of attack was to siege the city, where King Henry VII was currently residing. And this siege failed, and once again, his men died, and Perkin Warbeck had to go into hiding once again. And he was able to flee successfully. Well, at least successfully, because he escaped the battle alive, but not fully successfully, because the place that he ended up residing applied a lot of pressure to Perkin. So much pressure so that he actually ended up surrendering himself to the English government, because he was promised a pardon if he surrendered instead of causing any more battles. In 1497, while being tried in front of the real king himself, Perkin Warbeck finally came clean about his elaborate scam and fake life. He told the king that he was not the prince in the tower and he was not royalty whatsoever. He straight up admitted to being a pretender because he was promised immunity for telling the truth. But obviously that wasn't the case. After this admission, he was kept close to the king and essentially imprisoned. And a year later, he actually tried to escape England, where he was caught and brought back, and at that point he was put, ironically, in the Tower of London, where the initial 2 lost princes were lost from. And it was in here where Perkin Warbeck tried to plan another escape and another overthrowing of the government, essentially. That plan was uncovered, and Perkin Warbeck was executed in 1499. This was a bit of a longer segment, but I wanted to go into detail because this story is literally insane. In a 9-year span, Perkin Warbeck is going from a rich kid who's just living in Ireland selling silk to, from the suggestion of a friend, dedicating the next 9 years of his life essentially on a conquest to claim that he is the long-lost heir to the throne and trying to overthrow the English king, in which he almost does successfully and ends up admitting everything and then dying because of it. If that's not a scam, I don't know what is. The modern era. Unfortunately, there is absolutely no shortage of scams in the modern day, and I'm sure anybody watching this video right now could name at least 5 to 10 scams just off the top of their head. And that's primarily because of access of information. And at least today, scams are exposed quicker than they would have been at any point in history before. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're exposed quickly enough.